Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Penningham. Detroit's bankruptcy trial begins August 14th. Detroit retired and active city workers voted to accept pension cuts of 4.5% plus loss of cost of living increases because even heavier cuts were possible if they voted against these cuts. Their pensions average $19,000 to $20,000 a year. Police and firefighters voted to accept losing part of their pension cost of living raises. Police and fire pensions in Detroit average $32,000 a year. The federal bankruptcy seeks to eliminate or drastically cut $18 billion in debt. The pension cuts are being forced on Detroit workers, even though the state constitution says that public worker pensions can't be cut. The federal bankruptcy judge ruled that federal bankruptcy law a pensions cut prohibition. Michigan's attorney general has he disagrees with the judge's ruling, but he's not to legally challenge the ruling. U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin agrees with the AFGE, the union representing frontline Veterans Affairs caregivers, that staffing shortages are a big reason why so many veterans have such long waits for health care. Senator Baldwin has introduced a bill to increase VA staffing.
The reason for the long waits is that the VA in some areas is woefully understaffed. There are not enough physicians and other healthcare providers for the very significant needs that our veterans present today. The bill that I've introduced tries to essentially leverage greater healthcare availability in the VA by permitting the Veterans Health Services to hire more medical residents.
The Medicare Trust Fund is solvent until 2030, 4 years longer than was projected last year. The trustees' report released Monday cited the Affordable Care Act and its various cost savings reforms as a major contributing factor to the longer solvency for Medicare. The report says the healthcare law known as Obamacare included provisions aimed at reducing costs, increasing revenues, and combating fraud and abuse. A new study published in the New England Journal of Medicine estimates that over 10 million adults gained health insurance due to the Affordable Care Act. States that expanded Medicaid under the health care reform law saw significant coverage gains for low-income people 18 to 64 years old. The study found similar results to one by Gallup and the estimates from the Congressional Budget Office.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor. Bank of Labor has provided trust and fiduciary services to labor organizations for nearly a century. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
West side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rock on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my town.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots of things to talk about. Hopefully things on your mind. You know, for me, a couple of big labor decisions, couple of interesting direction pieces that I'm going to talk about later. Also, tax inversion. Yes, the patriotic company known as Walgreens. It's evidently yesterday I was calling it Walgreen. I didn't know I was doing it, so thank you for correcting my Walgreen state. It's Walgreens. So we need to get that on our tongues so that when there's no one there, we know where we're not going. We know we're not going to go to the Walgreens store in our neighborhood, even though in my neighborhood there aren't any that I can find, or I would not go there. So there's that. Going to talk about that. Also going to talk about an interesting website. The cons, I got to give conservatives credit. And a little bit later on in the program, we're going to talk with the guy who's the researcher over at Equality Matters about this right-wing anti-gay website that really is just a profit-generating center. And this is what the right understands much, much better. And I will admit openly, I am not a huckster. We wrote a book. I got to figure out how to try and huck it, but I'm not comfortable being a huckster. And sadly, I've come around to the reality that this gig is about being a huckster. And it's not something I'm pleased with. But the right understands that to their core. The last talkers convention I went to really highlighted that point. I ran into a woman named Dana Lesh. And she was very open about it. Every syllable that comes out of her mouth, she wants to capitalize on. She wants to monetize. To the people that I met at that convention, it was about, how do I make money off of it? It's not about honesty. It's not about belief. It's about none of that. It's what sells. And the sooner I think that the American voter, the American taxpayer, the American thinker starts going, this is all political theater. This is all a show on the right wing, when they're trying constantly hawking you products, constantly, and I've spent some time listening to right wing talk radio, and it's all about how do I get the transition to the next product. It's not really about having what I believe this medium should be, is a medium where you're talking with people, you're expressing ideas, and you're discussing those ideas. For the right, it's not that. So later on in the program, we're going to talk about the anti-gay website, who, part of me goes, the guy who's running it's probably a closeted gay guy. But he's just figured out how to capitalize on ignorance and stupidity. And that's a lot of what these right-wing outlets, that's what they do. They play on people's fear. They pander to their ignorance and their racism. Why? Money. Pretty simple. Bottom line. How much cash can they put in their pockets? And the sad reality, and I guess it speaks volumes about us as human beings. It works. They make big bucks off of this stuff. And I guess there's a couple of things, it says about us, but we'll talk about that. Also, Mike Stack's going to be here, the lieutenant governor candidate, senator here from Pennsylvania, to talk about the gubernatorial race as the big poll numbers have come in. And you got to love these new polls that say, oh, Governor Corbett's right there. It's neck and neck. Because they got to figure out how to get money into the state to get Corbett some money. Got to make it look like a race. Because if you remember when they almost thought they could possibly make it look like a race between Obama and Romney here, a whole bunch of money come flooding in right away, and then they realized, oh, that was a scam. And the money left. That's what I think this is. This is a way to get the moneyed base to be looking at Pennsylvania, because pretty much the big moneyed people, I think they'd written off Pennsylvania. This poll might help. So it'll be interesting to look at that and so much more. A little bit of history today, though. Today, back in 1958, President Dwight David Eisenhower, the socialist, the good socialist president, Dwight David Eisenhower, signed the authorization to create NASA. The idea that, maybe we should be the leader in the space age. Maybe we should be investing in the future. Maybe we should be thinking about that just a little bit. Thinking about how we can put money into research and development that will get us to be the leader in the space. And I don't care what it was. I think at the time, it could have been just making widgets or whatever. I think that would have happened under Eisenhower. And I think you had a Congress on some level that, from both parties, that said, yeah, it's about investing in the future. Sadly, our Congress today, no matter what, politically polarized, even more so than you could imagine during the Eisenhower years. And it got me to thinking, you think about this, what NASA was able to accomplish and all of the things that came out of it, we got Tang. We would have never had Tang without NASA. And when I had taken my kids to Disney World down in Florida, and we met a guy there who he spent his entire career working for NASA. He spent like 45 years there. And he just rattled off hundreds of things that came out of the space program, the technology and the research that came out of it that ended up in the private sector and new products that you would have never imagined. Tang is always because when I was a kid, it's the drink of astronauts, right? But this guy just rattled off hundreds of things, in this short little train ride that you go, without this investment, this first step to saying, we're going to be the leader in this technology, we would have never had. I mean, you think about the robotics and all of the things that came out of it, all of the advancements that came out of it. And it got me to thinking about those years and wondering, at least from what I learned about the Eisenhower years, obviously wasn't alive then, but it got me to thinking about them. And, the idea that we could do big things, we could think big thoughts. Sadly, today, we can't even decide if we should have red or blue walls in a room. We can't seem to decide really, just basic fundamental stuff. I mean, a transportation bill. We can't get a transportation bill. Can't decide. Can't figure it out. The border issue. You would think, okay, we've got this, what used to be a time where we got all these children coming in. What do we do with them? Now there are people actually saying we should put landmines on the border. And it got me to thinking about, just the amazing investments of the Eisenhower years. The Federal Highway Act that paved some, 45,000 miles of interstate highway in this country in about a decade. A federal investment of about $30 billion at the time. And you go, could we do such a thing today? I don't know. And you go back to the Eisenhower years where there were the same pressures, wanting tax cuts and wanting to increase defense spending and do all of these very right-wing things, and he fought it. If you remember, 92% top marginal tax rate during the Eisenhower years. Refused to cut the tax rate. And in that period, he had balanced budgets 3 times. And you look at this, and he ended the Korean War. Kept us out of countless wars that we could have gotten into. Had the Hawks wanted us involved in this stuff. And I go back and I start to wonder, how have we run so far off the path of what my grandparents' generation stood for? How have we gotten so far away from just things that we can agree on? It's just odd to me. And you think about Social Security, you think about unemployment insurance, things that my grandparents' generation fought for. You think about labor laws that my grandparents' generation fought for. And have him say, anyone who would be against those things, you wouldn't hear again. You wouldn't hear from in their political history. He said, no, there's a tiny splinter group, the H.L. Hunts, a few Texas oil millionaires, occasional politician, but their numbers are negligible and they're stupid. And the sad reality is stupid seems to be running things, which is why we really, honestly, need to be getting back to common ground. If the politicians can't do it, we've got to. Anyway, going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I say to myself, oh, wonderful world.
Yeah, Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
It's time for the world in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations. After more than a week of shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon are back on American soil, and the fighting between Hamas and Israel continues unabated. There was a brief 12-hour pause in fighting on Saturday, but negotiations to extend that ceasefire failed. Ban Ki-moon told reporters today what he thought was holding back a lasting cessation of hostilities.
It's a matter of their political will. They have to show their humanity as leaders, both Israeli and Palestinians. And particularly when they continue to fight, then it's only the people, only the civilians, helpless civilians, who are being suffered and killed.
Switching to Ukraine, the front lines of fighting between the Ukrainian army and pro-Russian separatists are nearing the site of downed Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Over the weekend, an offensive by the Ukrainian armed forces left dozens of rebels dead, and Kiev said today their troops had retaken a portion of the crash site. That would constitute a meaningful military victory, but would also appear to be a violation of a United Nations Security Council resolution passed last week that ordered the cessation of all fighting within a wide radius around the debris. Here's Russia's UN Ambassador Vitaly Churkin this afternoon.
President Poroshenko promised that there will be no activity of Ukrainian military within the radius of 40 kilometers. That did continue, and that fighting did not allow the international investigators and those who are supposed to accompany them for the purposes of protection to reach the crash site.
For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. On Fox News Sunday, Washington Post columnist and Fox contributor George Will pushed back against his Fox colleagues, arguing that the assumption that we can't assimilate the children is, quote, preposterous.
My view is that we ought to say to these children, welcome to America, you're going to go to school and get a job and become Americans. The idea that we can't assimilate these 8-year-old criminals with their teddy bears is preposterous.
Will's comments are a pronounced contrast to some of the positions held by other Fox News pundits, notably the extreme anti-immigration agenda highlighted by Fox News and ABC contributor Laura Ingraham recently on The O'Reilly Factor.
Okay, first thing you do is start deporting people, not by the hundreds, not by the dozens, by the thousands, and that means entire families. There has to be an end to this thing called birthright citizenship. Some people call it anchor babies.
For more on this and other stories, visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Since a prehistoric ages, and the days of ancient Greece, right down to the Middle Ages, planet Earth kept going through changes, and then the Renaissance came. The times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same, but there were always renegades, like Chief Sitting Bull, Tom Hanks.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, I'm telling you, hoping change is coming in November. You know, I look at the statement yesterday by Lieutenant Governor Jim Cawley at the Manufacturers Association, and what a fitting place for the Republicans to hold their moment to try and kickstart, to reignite, to try and do something with the failing Corbett campaign. You throw out the B guy, who I haven't heard anything from in the last 3.5 years. So you pull him from the swimming pool there at the lieutenant governor's mansion and throw him out there to say, we weren't explaining what we were doing. We're just doing our job. Whatever that is, really didn't explain that. But I love that. We were focused on doing our job. We weren't actually talking to our constituents. Very, very strange to me. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about the campaign coming up. Hopefully in November there's some change. I've asked Senator Mike Stack, who is also the lieutenant governor candidate, to come talk with us. Senator Stack, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for everything you're doing. Thanks for having me on board.
So what do you think of this? We weren't really explaining what we were doing. We were just doing it. Does that seem like a thoughtful answer or a decent answer?
No. And it's been 3.5 years of this kind of nonsensical policy. We live in a democracy, and clearly part of your job as a leader is to go in a direction that's responsible, but often we judge responsible by what the people think is the best way to go, and you come up with good policy. But they're not the head of some corporation where they can just decide what they think is the right thing to do. And we can see they basically been taking this truck we call Pennsylvania, and they're driving it over a cliff.
Yeah.
So we got to go in a different direction.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I look at this, and as I'm watching this speech that he's given at the Manufacturers Association, which again I find most fitting, he's standing behind a podium with a plaque on it saying "Property Tax Relief through Pension Reform." And really, to me, that sign highlights this entire administration of always pitting one group of people against another. It's not about bringing anyone together. It's about continually dividing us into subsections that can be used against one another.
And really what they're doing is by continuing to try and divide, they're unifying the opposition. And I go to a lot of places. I run into Republicans, people who say that they're conservative Republicans, say they're never going to vote for Tom Corbett ever again because of what he's done in slashing public education. He talks, they want to divide, and it's for a political end. But I mean, tying the pension issue to property taxes is so disingenuous, particularly because everyone really recognizes it's these massive education cuts that clearly everyone gets it have caused the property tax increases. And so not only are they're not being real with the people, they're just being stupid with public policy.
That's exactly what I said yesterday. I go, it's ironic, and I guess just the irony is so thick that you have to almost choke on it to realize that the property tax problem is directly tied to this $1 billion a year cut to education and really slashing the future of our children. I mean, I'm looking at stories that are saying, we've got a lost generation of kids right now who have missed their opportunities because of this administration's misplaced priorities.
Rick, it's so true. And we can talk about our natural resources being the Marcellus shale gas find. That is a form of natural resources that all the people of Pennsylvania should be able to claim. But the most important resource we have is our young people. And you are absolutely right in that a generation, 3.5 years of failed education policy, inadequate funding, larger classrooms, teacher layoff, that's going to cost these young people forever. And they're going to be running to catch up and in a very competitive world. And if we're going to do one thing right, it's to make sure that they can get an adequate public education and that we have a good system out there. And this administration has done nothing. They've gutted the administration, then they've denied they've gutted it, and they've continued with their misguided policies. And the people of Pennsylvania, parents and kids, are going to have to pay the consequences. So hopefully in the future, we can get this ship righted and get our priorities focused on young people and building their future, because they're our best hope.
But Lieutenant Governor Cawley yesterday, Jim Cawley, said it's all a damned lie. All of it.
I thought that you can call it a damn lie, and I like Jim as a person. On a one-on-one basis, he's a very pleasant guy to be around. But it's a ridiculous statement to say it's all a damn lie, because what part of it is a lie? Please answer that question. Everything that's being said for the most part about what Tom Corbett has done is absolutely true. I mean, you can argue about the consequences, meaning when I say something like this, a child's going to be hurt forever because they have not gotten the proper education now, we can argue about that. But you can't say that it's a lie that you've got a public education and that's been devastating. You can't say it's a lie that you've got a public education and that has caused property taxes to continue to rise to unacceptable levels. And you could say it's a lie that your policies have led us to be near the bottom in job creation and economic growth. But all the statistics bear that out, plus the people walking around in the world in Pennsylvania can feel that, know that, people who are out of work know that, and families who are suffering know that. So Jim needs to tell us what part of the story is the damn lie.
Yeah, you know, I saw an article in the newspaper of the investor class, the Wall Street Journal, that said Pennsylvania had the fourth slowest growing economy in the country. And when the newspaper of the investor class tells you that you have the fourth slowest growing economy, that to me says something. I mean, because that really is the people who are backing Corbett. So it's surprising to me that the Wall Street types would want someone like Corbett, who has really been, in my view, the main driver of our poor recovery and our downslide.
He's probably been a disappointment even to them. And, you know, we've had to downgrade our rating. Moody's, the financial class, the folks who rate our financial stability, have downgraded us. And once again, talking about who's telling the truth and who is not, Tom Corbett has said that downgrade is because of the pension crisis. Yet Moody's, when he said this, specifically said it's not anything to do with the pension crisis. It's because of the poor state of public education, our horrible job growth level, and his failed and unstable leadership, which has led to that downgrading. So on all those counts, Tom Corbett has failed, and I'll bet you, Tom Wolf and Mike Stack aren't standing up. We want to stand up to drive Pennsylvania forward in a positive way for all Pennsylvanians, not for one class of people. But I bet you in the next couple of years, if we can successfully get elected, folks come to the polls and everybody rises up, we'll have a very strong rating. And the Wall Street Journal will say Pennsylvania is a great place for investment in jobs because they've got their priorities right. People are working. People are getting educated. People have a shot at being middle class, and that's what it's all about.
But Mike, I read the headline today. There was a big story over at Politics PA, and you can gauge that however you have to, based on the source that it is. But they're saying that Corbett and Wolf are within single digits. It's close.
Well, listen, I try not to pay too much attention to any kind of polling, whether the polling has a Tom Wolf up, Mike Stack up by 25 points or 22 points or 20 points, and now this most recent one, which apparently the pollsters who do this particular survey are not highly regarded and are thought to have skewed information, and it's based on unreliable data that has it to either 9 points, or when you ask where people are leaning, it's 14 points for Wolf. I think that clearly the policies and the way people feel about them that I talk to and that Tom Wolf talks to when we meet people, I think that's your best polling that you run into when you hear disappointed parents who say, they're ready for a fresh start, they're ready for a new administration that could bring new ideas and turn the state around. When I run into those people, it seems like there's many, many more of them than whatever this survey is saying about, Tom Corbett's chances for re-election.
Yeah, I'm one of them. Look, I've got 3 kids who are in school age. My oldest daughter last year, going into 6th grade, got to sit in LGI, large group instruction, a class with 100 of her peers in a lecture hall in 6th grade. That to me is not the direction I want her education to go.
Listen, our classes should be getting much smaller, and everybody agrees. And for your 6th grader to have to go through that in this state, it's just it's so disheartening, and we can't go on like this. And everybody recognizes that the best way to reach kids, the best way to give them their best opportunity to meet their full potential is smaller classes, more attention from teachers that have the best training and are interested and inspired and want to be and teach the kids. And so obviously other states understand this, other countries understand this. Tom Corbett doesn't understand this. And for Pennsylvania, which could be the greatest state in the union, to be in this kind of predicament is completely unacceptable. It's not it's not everything we can be. It's so far from it, and we got to turn this thing around.
Yeah, I mean, we're better than the 4th slowest growing economy, or at least we should be in the country. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Senator Mike Stack, Lieutenant Governor candidate. StackForPA.com, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Senator Stack's name, take you right there. Let me ask you this. We've seen this infighting in the Republican Party, which I got to be honest, when you have this kind of one-party rule, I've been seeing them kind of try and point fingers at Democrats and point fingers everywhere else but to themselves. You got one-party rule in this state. And they can't even do that right. Now there's the talk of maybe lawsuits, and there's all of this bizarre infighting going on. And again, I don't know how this is good for the Commonwealth, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I've always felt like we have the greatest system in the world in America, and we usually are really good at having checks and balances between the courts and the two branches of the legislature and the executive. And in Pennsylvania, we've sort of gone in this direction where, for the most part, you've had Republican majorities and domination in every portion of government. But you're right. They can, at the current time, and I have respect for a number of Republican leaders that I serve with in the legislature, it seems that no one in the Republican Party is in sync in any particular branch. You have Governor Corbett fighting with his own Republican leadership. They can't get the job done. And, we've got a job to do, which is serve the people of Pennsylvania, regardless of their party affiliation. And I think, too much power ultimately leads to ineffectiveness and inefficiency and all kinds of human frailties and shortcomings. And we've seen it, and it's not working. And that's why we're in this terrible situation with terrible job growth, poor education funding, and a general lack of hope for the future. Even though we have everything we need here, Rick, we have the greatest schools, we have the greatest people, we have great health systems and health care, and we have creative, smart people who want to stay here, and yet we're failing. So I think people have to take a look. Who's elected, who's in the most responsible positions, and we've got to change that because clearly it's not working. So I think it's time we clean house. I'm not afraid to say that I think the way the Democrats do it is better, and so we should start at the top, and then we should capture legislative seats wherever we can because there are some exceptions out there, but for the most part, I think Democrats really stand up for working people, for expanding a middle class, for a fair living wage, and for equality. And so folks have to get out there and vote. They have to tell their cousins, their friends, their family to make sure that they all vote in November because it's really important.
Yeah, I'm with you. But let me ask you the million-dollar question then, because I look at what Governor Corbett and the Republicans have not done, and there are no accomplishments for this governor to go to the voters with in November. There's nothing that you can say this is what I've done. He has none of that, which is why I think this hostage situation this has popped up. But what do you do? Let's say and hopefully you do. Hopefully you and Tom Wolf are the next governor and lieutenant governor. But you have a Republican-controlled legislature or House or Senate or whatever. How do you deal with that, given the fact that the Republicans themselves, being one-party rule, can't do anything to move us forward? How do you bridge that gap?
Well, I think that it's a very good question, Rick. I think that's a key to leadership, and that's what Tom Corbett hasn't been able to do. I think it's really, people talk about folks that are in responsible positions that sometimes people perceive it as glamorous, and boy, it's great to be in charge. But part of being in charge is spending a lot of time asking other people to help you, and asking them to support you and to participate with you and getting things done. And I think that's Tom Corbett's problem. He doesn't have those relationships with his own party, let alone with Democrats. And these are people that he needs to help him carry out what his agenda. I don't know what it is, but what
I don't think he knows what it is.
Yeah, it's like back to school a little bit with that Rodney Dangerfield part. He cares, he really cares about what? I have no idea. But the bottom line is, I think that Tom Wolf has shown in his career that he's always been willing to work with folks who want to work with him. And he's been willing to put his hand out to get folks to get on a quest with him. I have done the same thing in my career in the Senate, to reach out to people on both sides of the aisle, have worked with them. And I believe that you have to give respect to leaders no matter what their party is. So if you want people to help you, you've got to ask them, and you've got to get them interested and invested. And I can't imagine that although there are a lot of policies I don't agree with in the Republican Party, I think that they want to make sure that kids get educated, and they certainly got to be hearing from their constituents about the poor funding of public education and how it's related to, unfair taxes and increases in property taxes. So I think that they want to get reelected. So they want to do things that their constituents want them to do. And I think you can find those common ground. You can find that common ground, but people got to ask. And I'm the type of guy who would ask, who would put in the time to work with folks on the other side of the aisle. And so is Tom Wolf, and I think that's what it takes. You got to roll up your sleeves, you got to ask people to help you, and you got to get them interested. Corbett hasn't done that. Wolf will.
Good answer there. Last question I've got for you. I've talked to a number of legislators who have said that this budget, even with the vetoed parts, little bits and parts, this is a ticking bomb. This is, let's say you and Secretary Wolf become governor and vice and lieutenant governor. There's a bomb waiting for you, from what I'm told, that there's not enough money to make it through the entire budget, may make it to February, March, and then boom, what do you do?
Well, you make a very good, you bring up a very important point, Rick. What this governor has done really is he said he's a fiscal conservative, said he's a responsible manager of the economy, and what he's done is he's used 3.5 years of one-time gimmicks, of smoke and mirrors, of Band-Aids, of irresponsible cuts, and funded programs that he actually doesn't have the revenue for. And so we're going to have a very tough and challenging job in front of us, and we're going to have to find a way to fund the programs that are essential. And to tell you the truth, we're going to have to find ways to fund programs that the revenue hasn't been allotted because of the gimmicks that have been used.
Right.
So I think we're going to have to get a lot of folks invested. We're going to have to seriously. We're going to have to engage the natural gas folks. They're going to have to accept an extraction tax, and they will. And we're going to have to find more innovative ways. We're going to encourage manufacturing in a innovative and fair way. We're going to be better with job training. We're going to be smarter on taxes, and we're going to close a bunch of tax loopholes that have allowed for just big tax giveaways to corporations that aren't loyal to the state. So I think it's going to be a challenging job. It's not going to be an easy one, but I think we'll be able to right the ship by managing an economy responsibly. And I'm not afraid to say it. We're gonna tax natural gas in a responsible way, just like all the other states that are comparable, and including states like Texas and Alaska, tax their natural gas drillers. We need to do this. We need to get them to play fair, play responsibly, and I think that's going to help everybody in Pennsylvania. And businesses should be interested in the state they're in succeeding. They sure haven't helped our economy the way it's been done right now.
Yeah, I mean, giving them all the handouts, all the corporate welfare, it hasn't really done what we were told. We were told if we give them everything, the world would be paved with gold and honey, and not quite working out that way. But I'm hoping for a change come November. Of course, the website, stack4pa.com. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. You can check out his website just by clicking on his name. Senator Stack, always great talking with you. Look forward to having you back again real soon.
Rick, thanks to all your listeners. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
And I go to work at night. I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Did you scramble to get your taxes done this year, dashing to the mailbox at the last minute? Yeah, me too. I really don't mind paying what I owe, but I hate having to pay the taxes owed by the likes of J.P. Morgan Chase, Mitt Romney, Exxon, and Amazon. They're just a few of the astonishingly profitable corporations and super-rich financial hucksters who walk their tax tabs each year, thus putting the cost of everything from the military to our national parks onto our shoulders. We constantly hear CEOs and their congressional hirelings wail about the punishing tax rate of 35% assessed on corporate profits. But they're grinning as they're crying, for they know they actually pay nowhere near that. In fact, the latest assessment by the Government Accountability Office found that U.S. corporations pay an average tax rate of only 12.6%, forcing workaday taxpayers to cover the multiple billions of dollars that these privileged elites dodge. How do they do that? Simple. They duck through ridiculous loopholes in our tax laws. How ridiculous? Try the subsidy for corporate criminals. If you get a speeding ticket, do you get to deduct the fine from the income tax you owe? Ha, just try it. But J.P. Morgan Chase was fined more than $20 billion last year for major frauds and consumer rip-offs, and his honchos have now deducted that punishment from the corporate tax bill, claiming it as a cost of doing business. Oh, they also get to deduct the many millions of dollars they paid lawyers to defend their blatant wrongdoing. This is Jim Hightower saying, well, sniff the elites, we're merely making rightful use of the deductions allowed by tax laws. But it's their lawyers who wrote those laws to legalize their thievery. And need I mention that they also get a deduction for the mega salaries and expenses of those lawyers? So we pay for their wrongdoings, their fines, and their lawyers.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
That's why I started giving these speeches. My job is not only commander-in-chief, but educator-in-chief. And I needed to say to the people, you bet it's tough.
I guess the same guy who wrote that speech during the Bush years is writing the speeches for Corbett, or at least for Colley, saying, you know what, well, we were too busy working. We couldn't tell you what we were doing. That's not our job to tell you what we were actually doing, which is nothing. I mean, there are no accomplishments. Nothing. Well, I shouldn't say that there are no accomplishments. There are. We have a lost generation of kids right now. And you go, it's only 3 years, Rick. No. It's 3 years for every kid all the way through K through 12. Study after study has shown, especially the K through 3 years, you lose those 4 years. If those kids fall behind in those 4 years, they're done. They're done. Study after study shows you don't get them back. And there are studies that show that by second grade, they're already in the pipeline to prison. We have the information. We already know it. But you got this governor who's, we don't need the money. No, don't need it. And we've got all of these dysfunctional pieces to education. It's not about rebuilding education. It's about building it. It's about fixing what we've allowed to get screwed up for too long. And I looked at this story from Philadelphia, who they don't have a school district per se. They've got the School Reform Commission, which was the state took over years ago, and with the governor appoints the people who sit on this, or at least a majority of the people who sit on it. And it's not surprising that very corporate minded, very charter minded, and it's even interesting to me that they're screwing that up. There's this Imani charter school that evidently started back in '99. K through 8 had about 450 kids enrolled last year. It's had some problems, lots of problems. I don't even know that it should have ever been allowed to exist, but that's just my view. They're still not knowing whether they're going to open come September. The School Reform Commission has a report that maybe we'll know in August, late August, but not sure. So the question is, August 21st is the next SRC meeting. School opens in September, so there's about a week to get school going. And I guess it shows the mentality of the people that they set on this, that you could just start a school up like that. It's just education. How hard can that be? And this is my problem with this whole charter thing. All of this money that goes into this that could be put into one system that is improved every year. But you look at the cuts that this governor has gotten away with. $1 billion a year each of the last 3 years. And you go, but Rick, that was just $1 billion once. No, that was $1 billion the first year. There was no $1 billion the second year. There was no $1 billion the third year. That's $3 billion in my math. I mean, you could say, oh, well, that was last year's cut. No, if you cut it last year, that means you cut it again this year because it wasn't there. So over at the Philly Inquirer, they asked a couple of guidance counselors, what's going on with the schools? Because like I said, if you lose them K through 3, they're gone forever. You're not getting them back. The cost of remediation is just enormous, and the money's just not there. So they're talking about to these high school guidance counselors, and they're asking the question, what do you see? Well, what they've come across is because of the budget cuts, there aren't going to be as many kids from the Philadelphia School District going to college next year. There are drop-off rates where, you had at one point maybe 75%, that number's down to 65%. And you go, wow, it's just 10%. Not a big deal. It's a huge deal for our Commonwealth. And, as the superintendent, this William Haidt Jr. said, and, this is the guy who's the head of all of this. He said, we can do so much better for our children than our current budget allows. A student's potential should not be limited by our society's inability to fully fund the basic resources that are commonly found in other schools throughout the region. So, when I was a kid, there were 3 guidance counselors. My senior class, my graduating class was 147 students. And that was about the size of each grade, about 150 for each grade. So you're talking the entire 9 through 12, you're talking 600 people, 600 students, 3 guidance counselors. You look at the school down in the Philadelphia area, the Northeast High School, that has a student body of about 3,000, that just 2 years ago, thanks to the budget cuts of Corbett, they had 10 counselors, now down to 2 full-time counselors. And you go, is it any surprise that the percentage of people going to college went from 61% down to 57%? And That was 2012. They don't have the 13 numbers yet. And you go, these are lost opportunities. And it's because of these budget cuts. And the one story out of this story that came up is, this one woman said, look, when I got let go, there were a bunch of kids that, things happened in their lives. And she points to one student whose father died. And he dropped out of school and was gone. He was gone. And there was nobody left to notice. There wasn't a guidance counselor there. The teachers reported it and went through the system that's supposed to be there where the guidance counselor actually does this. Wasn't there. And evidently this kid had a really high SAT score. Could have gone into college. It may still at some point down the road. It's just not now. But they point out that in this one school that had 100% graduation rate, there were 10 students that didn't graduate last year. And to her, it's unfathomable. And you go, okay, well, now you're talking about the kids K through 3 who've lost their opportunity. Now you've got these juniors and seniors who aren't going to go to college, some who have dropped off and been left to the wayside. You're talking an entire generation. It's just not 3 years. And this is why I say this is a generation that's being left behind. This is a generation that is lost because of the missed opportunity that they had with education, because of our misplaced priorities, because of people like Corbett. And you go, oh, Rick, it's not that important. Yes, it is that important, especially in an area like where these places are, where you got to be honest, growing up as a kid in the projects, you didn't get many shots. You didn't get many opportunities. And the one you did get, you better damn well take advantage of, and it better be there for you. So now, as the one woman points out, she goes, the funding's not there. There's no guidance counselor. There are no nurses. There are no librarians. There's none of this stuff. So what is it telling the kids in an already economically challenged area with few opportunities? It says that, well, the state doesn't care about you. Nobody, you don't matter. And I know in my neighborhood, you go, oh, well, who cares? That's Philadelphia. Thing is, eventually, it comes around to all of us. One way or another, be it higher prison costs, be it higher social welfare costs, be it, hey, someone may, because of desperation, stick a gun or a knife in your face. We got to start thinking in an entirely different way. And our governor, what does he do? The Secretary of Education, you may remember him, this Ron Tamales, who resigned 14 months ago, or they said, he just retired or whatever. He stepped aside. Because he was going to be some consultant that, as the governor said, was going to oversee, implement, and review any educational recommendations put forth by the governor's advisory commission on post-secondary education. Well, there are people going, well, what in the past 14 months have you done? Because nobody can figure out what he's done. Nothing. Nobody can figure out what he's done to earn his $140,000 a year plus benefits salary. Oh, and he gets to work from home. Nobody's figured that out, and I don't know what he's done. But I do know you're talking probably about, I don't know, $175,000, $180,000 that could have been spent to, hire 2 of those counselors back. That maybe would have saved those kids from dropping out or those kids from not getting into college. Maybe that would have been a much better way to spend the money. What do you think? But again, it comes back down to these really screwed up priorities. And I ask you, is it right? Is this the right thing to be doing? Sherry sent me an email. She said, in your conversation with Bryce Covert on the topic of universal pre-K, as a retired school teacher, let me say it's about time we give kids that wonderful opportunity to expand their world. But I began thinking about our inability to guarantee K through 12 with talk in some areas of cutting K. All of the things you talked about are things our country seems headed in the opposite direction of, at least for some students. Have you seen this article from Detroit? So Sherry sends me this article from Detroit that's headline reads, "School puts nearly 100 kindergartners in one class in teaching experiment." They showed pictures of the 100 kids in the teaching experiment. And the Washington Post article says, hey, this is not a headline from The Onion. You look at the pictures, not a white face in the picture. So can you, and I am not the guy who goes, this is a racial situation. I am not the guy who says, oh, this is race baiting. I'm not that guy. But you got to ask the question. We're experimenting with children's future, that one opportunity to get out of poverty by putting 100 children in one kindergarten class? Really? You may remember Detroit last year, and thank you for the article, Sherry. You may remember last year I talked about the fire marshal who issued a citation to one of the Detroit public schools because they had 55 kindergartners in a classroom because it was overcrowded. They've solved this. The kindergarten class has taken over the library, which, again, I kind of got to go, well, what about the rest of the kids getting time at the library? I know, Rick, it's an experiment. They're trying new things. I get that. But what frustrates me is these kids aren't going to get a chance to catch up once they fall behind their peers. Once they fall behind, they don't catch up. They end up in the prison pipeline. The article goes on to say that early childhood experts recommend that kindergarten students have a teacher-student ratio of no more than 1 teacher to 12 students. 1 to 12. That's what they say, because kids at that age, they need to be constantly engaged. And this is what I've said from the beginning. You need to have small, very small classes at the early ages because kids tend to wander mentally. You need someone to bring them and keep them engaged. You know, I don't know how difficult that is to come up with. Then as they get older, obviously, then you can put them into larger classes based on their ability to pay attention and their ability to perform. Kids that need a little more help, you give a little more help too. That's common sense. But this idea that we're going to put 100 kids in one class in what they call a kindergarten hub, to me is kind of ridiculous. The woman who's the leader of it was quoted in the newspaper saying, "Our model is we expect to see kids working independently in pairs and small groups. I would rarely expect everyone to be doing the same thing." The idea that you're going to have kindergartens working independently on a task, I have to question that philosophy. I have to question the knowledge of that. But again, the part of me that goes back to our problems in Philadelphia with the SRC is the exact problem you have here in Detroit, where it's no longer a school district, it's taken over by the Education Achievement Authority. So what you have is you have all of these schools who are struggling financially in neighborhoods that are struggling financially, that the states have walked away from. And we're doing this to our, and look, this is poverty. This is all of the things that we've talked about being highly pushed and highly capped. And I wonder what the future for these kids are. And I as a parent, I would be beyond myself. I would just be, I can't even tell you. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to town.
Public liberty, someday, somewhere, the nation's worst tomorrows,
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Detroit's bankruptcy trial begins August 14th. Detroit retired and active city workers voted to accept pension cuts of 4.5% plus loss of cost of living increases, because even heavier cuts were possible if they voted against these cuts. Their pensions average $19,000 to $20,000 a year. Police and firefighters voted to accept losing part of their pension cost of living raises. Police and fire pensions in Detroit average $32,000 a year. The federal bankruptcy seeks to eliminate or drastically cut $18 billion in debt. The pension cuts are being forced on Detroit workers, even though the state constitution says that public worker pensions can't be cut. The federal bankruptcy judge ruled that federal bankruptcy law trumps that state pensions cut prohibition. Michigan's attorney general has publicly said he disagrees with the judge's ruling, but he's not using his office to legally challenge the ruling. U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin agrees with the AFGE, the union representing frontline Veterans Affairs caregivers, that staffing shortages are a big reason why so many veterans have such long waits for health care. Senator Baldwin has introduced a bill to increase VA staffing.
The reason for the long waits is that the VA in some areas is woefully understaffed. There are not enough physicians and other healthcare providers for the very significant needs that our veterans present today. The bill that I've introduced tries to essentially leverage greater health care availability in the VA by permitting the Veterans Health Services to hire more medical residents.
The Medicare Trust Fund is solvent until 2030, 4 years longer than was projected last year. The trustees' report released Monday cited the Affordable Care Act and its various cost savings reforms as a major contributing factor to the longer solvency for Medicare. The report says the healthcare law known as Obamacare included provisions aimed at reducing costs, increasing revenues, and combating fraud and abuse. A new study published in the New England Journal of Medicine estimates that over 10 million adults gained health insurance due to the Affordable Care Act. States that expanded Medicaid under the health care reform law saw significant coverage gains for low-income people 18 to 64 years old. The study found similar results to one by Gallup and the estimates from the Congressional Budget Office.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor. Bank of Labor has provided trust and fiduciary services to labor organizations for nearly a century. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
And finally, we don't have unions in South Carolina. I wear heels, and it's not for a fashion statement. It's because we kick, and we kick those unions hard, and they will not step foot in the state of South Carolina.
Yeah, a governor. Imagine that. A governor who, in her best interest, we're gonna make sure that workers don't have the right to organize. And I remember when Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina, there said that at the Walmart meeting. And imagine that, going to the Walmart shareholders meeting, telling the Walmarts that don't worry about it. You're okay in South Carolina. We will make sure, even if I have to use the power of government to deny workers their rights. Imagine that. I mean, think about that for a second. I asked at the time, that's got to be illegal. On some level, that cannot be right. On some level, there's got to be recourse. And I'm hopeful at this point because I was told there's really no recourse yet other than voting her out. But I look at this piece of legislation that may be introduced, I'm guessing, next week, this week sometime, by Keith Ellison, the Democratic representative from Minnesota, that would give workers the ability to sue union busters. That's why I've asked Tep Royster, he's a labor policy intern over at the Century Foundation, to come talk to us Tep, thanks for taking time for us.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Rick.
So, I hear the governor there, and she says, we're going to kick them. We're going to kick them hard, and I don't wear these pointy shoes just because they look good. We're going to use the power of government. And I go back to the Eisenhower years, where Eisenhower said, if anybody were to come out against labor laws, they'd never be heard from. And the ones that do talk like that are stupid. And yet we've got stupid running one of our 50 states.
Yes, we certainly do. But as it stands now, currently there is a right to organize. However, the problem as it stands now is that when people attempt to exercise that right, the remedies for corporate violation of that right are inadequate to deter them from routinely firing employees who express interest in exercising their labor rights.
Inadequate is a nice way of putting none. Because virtually everybody I know who goes to those process, it's a lengthy, costly process that most average working people are never going to be able to weather.
Yeah, absolutely. It puts no dent into the bottom line of the corporation. They essentially write it off as a business expense, and they continue about their merry way, sort of violating their rights as they stand.
So now I understand Keith Ellison's going to introduce this bill. Tomorrow, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, at 2 p.m. In front of the House. A number of people will be joining him there to introduce a bill that would essentially make labor organizing a civil right. The basic premise of the bill is that it would extend the Title VII civil rights protections to labor organizers. So at present, existing federal law prohibits workplace discrimination on the basis of race, religion, sex, and ethnicity. And just like the Employment Non-Discrimination Act would extend these protections to include sexual orientation and gender identity, what Ellison's bill would do is extend these same protections to employees that seek to join or form a union. And that's a great big difference, because the Civil Rights Act was eminently successful at deterring corporations from firing workers on account of their race, religion, or gender. You don't hear very much about an employee in the workplace being fired because he's black, or because of, he's a Muslim, or because he or she is a woman.
Right, they just come up with other reasons.
Right, so they're still fudging that's possible there. But what Ellison's bill would do, it would empower an employee to sue a company who fires that person on account of his union activity. And given the success of the Civil Rights Act, in the event that it was expanded to include labor organizers, it would be a much more effective deterrent at keeping employees who are interested in joining a union on the job.
So let me ask you this. You say that it would give the right of workers to sue the employer. I got to be honest. I've worked for big companies in the past. I'm one guy. I don't know that I'm going to be able to muster the resources to take on a big multinational corporation. Walk me through how you see this process going.
Oh, okay. Well, the way that it would go, first of all, at the very end, right now, under the National Labor Relations Act, a person who's subject to an unfair labor practice, all that person will receive would be back pay and reinstatement on the job. And that back pay would have deducted the wages that the fired employee, the illegally fired employee, earned at the different job that he had to get on account of being fired.
Right.
In this process, under Ellison's bill, what that fired worker would get, rather than merely back pay on account of being illegally fired, he'd also be eligible for compensatory and punitive damages that amount to up to $300,000. And that total is much more, it gets the attention of the corporation to a much greater degree than merely back pay and reinstatement on the job. Additionally, the Civil Rights Act allows for payment of attorney's fees. So you mentioned if you're taking on a big corporation, you may not have enough money to sort of entice an attorney to take on your case. Under the Civil Rights Act, which would be extended to cover labor organizers by Ellison's bill, your attorney's fees would be covered by your employer in the event that you successfully file a claim for being illegally fired on account of exercising your labor rights.
So that might actually give workers a fighting chance.
Oh, absolutely. It incentivizes people to actually take advantage of their rights. It sort of attracts attorneys to take on the case. And then at the end of the process, the penalties are more than sort of a slap on the wrist or a speeding ticket or sort of a business expense that corporations could write off. If a single employee can be entitled to up to $300,000 in compensatory and punitive damages, well in excess of what most that the vast majority of American workers make in a single year, then yes, absolutely, that has the company's attention, and that company would be deterred from illegally violating the rights of every employee to join a form of union.
Yeah, I remember talking about the Employee Free Choice Act a couple of years ago, which I had hoped at one point during the Obama's first year that might possibly be something that could pass, given the fact that it was a seriously compromised bill that labor folks actually at one point thought the Bush administration might be okay with. But in that, it had, the monetary side of this was a penalty of 3 times the lost wages. So what you're talking about is probably even more significant than even that was.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I share your disappointment in the fact that the Employee Free Choice Act didn't even come up for a vote. It passed the House in the last 2 years of the Bush administration and was filibustered in the Senate and wasn't even brought up for a vote under a democratically led House and Senate. And this, I feel like at one point President Obama said that he would be walking the picket lines, as part of a demonstration for support for both union organizers and this piece of legislation.
Yeah. With comfortable shoes, I remember the comment. Just like I sat 20 feet from him when he said, "Trust me, I'm not going to pass free trade agreements." But that's a whole nother debate for a whole nother day. But back to this, because I think this is to me a significant piece of legislation that could stem some of the abuse that we see, and maybe even recreate the middle class at some point by giving workers the ability to share in the profits that they create. And I look at the fast food workers and the movement that's going on there for them, wanting to demand their right to be able to organize and to bargain in good faith. And I see this as things that go hand in hand.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm so glad that you brought up the fast food worker strikes, because they're a preeminent example of why Ellison's piece of legislation is absolutely needed and necessary at this very moment. The fast food worker strikes began almost 2 years ago, and since then, I feel like we haven't heard a single instance of a franchise or a franchisee anywhere in the country successfully unionizing. And that speaks to the fact of how weak these current laws are that govern employee-employer relations. And yeah, another quick point on top of that is that Bloomberg News actually released or within the last 2 weeks, came out with an article that demonstrates or indicates that an unfair labor practice is being filed by the NLRB against McDonald's and a series of fast food restaurants in the New York area. Had Ellison's bill been in place, those fired employees who were particularly enthusiastic and active about organizing their workforce would be subject to an injunction that would place them back on the job. They would be protected to a much greater degree than the National Labor Relations Act. And we'd be much further in the process of potentially unionizing that workplace. But as of right now, the process for reinstatement, potentially years long, and what these illegally fired workers would receive is their paltry wages, which are, I read that they're just above the minimum wage at this point, $8 and some change. So the incentives are such that, it makes economic sense for McDonald's to fire these workers and pay back their $8 an hour wages rather than potentially be subject to a union negotiation, which would have them, they seek $15 in the right to join a union. $15 is currently about twice what their average wage is. And even though it's illegal to do so, the penalties still are such that it makes more sense to violate the law.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And the $15 an hour, it just wasn't something they pulled out of the air in my mind. It was something that McDonald's themselves said was a living wage. And I don't know if you remember or not, but McDonald's and Visa had come out with a budgeting website, to kind of teach their employees how to budget their money. And
I believe that included in that said that $20 a month for health insurance. Wasn't that included on their list of?
Well, that was there too, but beyond the 40-hour work week at the fast food place came a second job mysteriously that nobody ever really found. There was a second $35 an hour, 35-hour work week in the second job that you go, well, yeah, you're right. We need that kind of wage for people to survive and exist. And you see all of the subsidies and all of the money that we give to the fast food industry and all of the profit that is divvied out among the Bloombergs of the world. And you go, they could easily pay a reasonable living wage that even they say at $15 an hour is what you need to be able to exist in this country.
No, absolutely. And in addition to that just being a wage necessary for a decent living, the productivity of these workers over the last several years has gone up as well. So, you know, we talk about the Bloombergs and the CEOs of these companies being paid in the tens of millions. This comes off the backs of workers who they themselves are becoming better, working harder, and are more productive on their job. So the gap between pay and productivity is what particularly kind of angers me about this explosion of income inequality, because, you know, these workers are working harder, longer, and better than ever. It's not reflected in their paychecks, but it's, you know, the shareholders and the executives who are enriched off of, you know, these people who toil, work very hard, and McDonald's themselves is willing to acknowledge that they need 40 hours plus an additional 35 elsewhere to enjoy a decent standard of living.
Yeah, and they don't even get an attaboy, a good slap on the back anymore. It's not even that. Let me ask you last line of questioning then, because, you know, I want to go back to the Nikki Haley comment. This using government as a union buster, using these big union busting law firms. I get suing the employer, but can we go? Would this law give you the ability to go after the Jackson Lewises and these other big union busting firms who have made their fortunes off of what they call union avoidance, which I just love the language. It's union busting. Will you be allowed to sue them as well, or is it just focused on the companies?
No, this is focused on the companies. I feel like each of those firms that you just mentioned, and it's a multi-million-dollar industry at this point, they would be hired to try to sort of poke holes in this new legislation to see how they can get around it. It's beyond just union avoidance. It's about exploiting whatever loopholes might exist in the law, and that's why the Civil Rights Act is the perfect vehicle through which to extend the rights of labor organizers, because the Civil Rights Act has withheld the test of time. It's a very effective law that deters companies from firing on the basis of race, gender, religion. If we were to add labor organizers to that, it would be, I imagine, it would be just as effective. There's no reason why, given the effectiveness of that law over time, that it could not withstand, you know, sort of comparable efforts by these firms that you mentioned prior. But at root, the bill would allow the right to sue companies directly, a private right of action that currently does not exist in the law.
Yeah, and maybe, you know, ultimately, it would maybe be that tool that would get employers and employees to the table, to where they could work things out instead of just having employees on the menu while the employer's sitting at the table. Just a thought.
Right, a very, very good thought that I'm hopeful to see take place as well.
There you go. Tep, I appreciate you coming on the program talking to us. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Rick, thank you for calling.
It was great talking with you. Tep Royster, labor policy intern over there at the Century Foundation. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's time for The World in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations. After more than a week of shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon are back on American soil, and the fighting between Hamas and Israel continues unabated. There was a brief 12-hour pause in fighting on Saturday, but negotiations to extend that ceasefire failed. Ban Ki-moon told reporters today what he thought was holding back a lasting cessation of hostilities.
It's a matter of their political will. They have to show their humanity as leaders, both Israeli and Palestinians. And particularly when they continue to fight, then it's only the people, only the civilians, helpless civilians, who are being suffered and killed.
Switching to Ukraine, the front lines of fighting between the Ukrainian army and pro-Russian separatists are nearing the site of downed Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Over the weekend, an offensive by the Ukrainian armed forces left dozens of rebels dead, and Kiev said today their troops had retaken a portion of the crash site. That would constitute a meaningful military victory, but would also appear to be a violation of a United Nations Security Council resolution passed last week that ordered the cessation of all fighting within a wide radius around the debris. Here's Russia's UN Ambassador Vitaly Churkin this afternoon.
President Poroshenko promised that there will be no activity of Ukrainian military within the radius of 40 kilometers. That did continue, and that fighting did not allow the international investigators and those who are supposed to accompany them for the purposes of protection to reach the crash site.
For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. On Fox News Sunday, Washington Post columnist and Fox contributor George Will pushed back against his Fox colleagues, arguing that the assumption that we can't assimilate the children is, quote, preposterous.
My view is that we ought to say to these children, welcome to America, you're going to go to school and get a job and become Americans. The idea that we can't assimilate these 8-year-old criminals with their teddy bears is preposterous.
Will's comments are a pronounced contrast to some of the positions held by other Fox News pundits, notably the extreme anti-immigration agenda highlighted by Fox News and ABC contributor Laura Ingraham recently on the O'Reilly Factor.
Okay, first thing you do is start deporting people, not by the hundreds, not by the dozens, by the thousands, and that means entire families. There has to be an end to this thing called birthright citizenship. Some people call it anchor babies.
For more on this and other stories, visit MediaMatters.org.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
Times like these you learn to live again. It's times like these you live again. It's times like these you learn to love again. It's times like
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Bill sent me an email during the break. Rick, you're slipping, brother. I cannot believe, Bill writes, that you didn't talk about the bonus army yesterday. He says, love the show, but somebody has to keep you on your toes. And Bill, you're right. Forgot to get to it. I mean, that's one of those things. Yesterday was another one of those shows where you go, I've got so much to get to, and I let that one continue. I'll get to it the next segment. And by the time I knew it, the show was over, and, well, I didn't get to it, and I apologize. For those who don't know, the bonus army, on this day, yesterday, back in 1932, Herbert Hoover ordered Douglas MacArthur, the General Douglas MacArthur, to go and kick these World War I workers, the World War I veterans who were saying, you know what, we're starving. We're in the middle of a depression. We can't feed our families. We can't feed our kids. There are no jobs. Nothing's going on. We need help. We want our pensions. We want to make sure that we can feed our families. So we want this pension money to help us to make it through the tough times. Well, there was a piece of legislation that had moved through the House. And earlier in the month of July, it had passed, which kind of made the bonus expeditionary force very happy. They wanted some cash payments for their pensions. And, the House passed the Patman bill, which would have, given money to these veterans to help them weather the Great Depression. The Senate, however, after the June 15th passage of the Patman bill in the House, they filibustered. Then it was defeated, and the marchers were not happy. And on July 28th, Hoover ordered MacArthur to go in and forcibly kick these, 2,000-3,000 people who refused to go home, because the federal government had said, well, we'll give you money to get back home. Here's some cash. And at one point, there were like 20,000 people in Washington, D.C., camping in the city, because, look, they're going, we're starving. We don't have the money to be able to support our families, so we're here. We want you to see face-to-face what's going on. And Hoover, not really giving a rat's behind about the poor, had MacArthur go in with the horses and, basically set fires to their camps and push them out of the city. And they did. And the story is Eisenhower, whom I like, for the most part, Eisenhower was part of that as well. A number of the people that we looked up to during World War II were part of this, to kick those people out. Instead of going, hey, let's figure out how to get these folks jobs, that's what they did. Anyway, interesting story, and thank you again, Bill. I appreciate the interest and the reminder. Interesting piece of legislation, interesting story that I'm hoping turns into a decision. As I understand it right now, according to this story by the Associated Press, the National Labor Relations Board it has issued a decision that I've been waiting for a while that would say that McDonald's, even though they're all franchisees, that they're not actually owned by the corporation per se, that all of the 14,000 restaurants that are owned and operated by these franchise holders are all part of McDonald's, that they can be can be named as a joint employer. And of course, you know, the spokesperson for McDonald's had basically exploded. This Heather Smedstead, she is the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for McDonald's USA. She said that, according to the article, that she was notified by the board's regional office in New York yesterday. She said McDonald's is obviously going to contest it, and that it doesn't direct hiring, termination, wages, or hours for workers at these franchise locations. She says that McDonald's has never been determined to be a joint employer in the past, and that this is such a radical departure that it should be a concern to businessmen and women across the country. The spokesman for the International Franchise Association, equally not pleased, says if franchisors are joint employers with their franchisees, these thousands of small business owners would lose control of the operations and equity that they have worked so hard to build. And I go, well, let me think about this for a second. I've known people who've owned franchises, that they're franchisees, that they bought the name. And here's reality. Just so maybe you have a thought in this. Most franchisees have to buy their food from a approved vendor. They have to buy in their signage, their machines, their stoves, their refrigerators. They have to comply on so many levels with the corporate demands that these really aren't individual owners. These are people who just they build the building to the specs that the McDonald's or the Wendy's or the whatever says that they have to. They have all of these things, and to say, and this is the part that gets me, and to say that, you know, the workers, you know, that's the franchisees' problem. All the other stuff that we benefit from, that's our concern. That's their concern. It's kind of ridiculous to me, and it'll be interesting to see how this works itself out. I'm interested to see where this will go, because to me, this could be a huge decision where industry-wide you could negotiate with McDonald's, the corporate overseer, and say these are the conditions under which employees at all McDonald's, so that, and here's the thing, so that all McDonald's are competitive on an even plan. Who's in the more convenient location, who offers the best product and the most timely service, who does that, instead of, you know, how can we cheat our workers out of our wages? To me, this could be a huge step in the right direction of leveling out. It will be interesting to see where this goes. Now, I'm told this is just a decision by the Secretary General, the head guy. That I'm not sure that this is an entire board decision. We're going to find out more tomorrow. But to me, that's huge, just enormous. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
On July 5th, 1935, the National Labor Relations Act was signed into law. It is also known as the Wagner Act after its chief sponsor, New York Senator Robert Wagner. Prior to its passage, Senator Wagner chaired the National Labor Board, created by Franklin Roosevelt in 1933 to attempt to bring order to labor management relations. The National Labor Board consisted of 3 representatives from labor and 3 from industry, with Wagner as the chairman. It was here that Senator Wagner realized government assistance was required to level the playing field if labor unions were to effectively bargain with management. President Roosevelt said of the National Labor Relations Act, it should serve as an important step toward the achievement of just and peaceful labor relations in industry. Hailed as the Magna Carta of labor, once the National Labor Relations Act was signed into law, workers were encouraged and protected to exercise their newly recognized rights to freedom of association, self-organization, and engage in concerted activities for the purpose of collectively bargaining through a representative of their own choosing in order to establish wages, hours, and conditions. Employer interference, such as threats and intimidation, firing, refusing to negotiate with the union, and discrimination for union activity were expressly prohibited. These illegal activities are described as unfair labor practices by the law. The impact of the Wagner Act on American life was substantial. The standard of living for American workers, their families, and communities was extraordinary. Unionization rates increased to a high of 35% of the American workforce as American workers demanded their rights. Working men and women finally had a unified voice to stand up and fight for dignity, respect, and safety in their workplace. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
The second topic, which is you said you get a deduction for taking a plant overseas. Look, I've been in business for 25 years. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, that's the hope. The hope is they don't get away, and we start holding these companies accountable. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. And we've been talking about this Walgreens situation for a couple of weeks now. I mean, since it broke. I mean, this idea that they're going to move overseas so that they can divvy up about $4 billion over the next several years to their shareholders seems to me to be, well, on a number of levels, A, wrong, B, unpatriotic, and from a policy position, pretty stupid on our part. That we allow this, even though Mitt Romney said, yeah, never heard of such a thing. Don't know what you're talking about. Kind of makes you wonder. And the question then becomes, what could $4 billion pay for? And here to help us answer some of that question, I've asked Frank Calente. He's the executive director of Americans for Tax Fairness to come talk with us. Frank, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks, Rich.
So I look at this scheme that the couple of billionaires, one here in the U.S. and one over, I guess, in Italy, are saying, hey, we want this company, this Walgreens, to merge with this Alliance Boots drug chain and leave the country. How is that good? Is that bad? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, in general, we don't have a problem with an American company buying another company offshore overseas. That is actually what has been happening. Walgreens already owns about half of this company, Alliance Boots, which is a retail pharmacy chain over in Europe. And by the end of the year, they're supposed to own 100% of it. That's fine. What's happened, though, is Walgreens came up with this idea. Frankly, it's been pushed on them by their hedge fund firms and their big investors. They've said to them, hey, you know what? In the process of taking over Alliance Boot, why don't you actually become a subsidiary of Alliance Boot, reincorporate your business in Switzerland, where the tax rate is a fraction of the U.S. tax rate, and voila, over 5 years, you will save or dodge $4 billion in taxes. So this isn't that Walgreens is taking over another company and running the show. It's actually that they're being doing this process where they're going to now be a subsidiary of this Swiss company. Actually, everything's going to still be run from America in Illinois. The headquarters isn't going to shut down. No employees are going to lose their job there. It's just a tax dodge that they're doing on paper, changing their corporate address to make it look like they're no longer an American company but a Swiss company in order to get out of what they're paying their fair share of taxes here.
How prevalent is this? This has really caught the attention of a number of media outlets, a number of people that I know. But this isn't new, is it?
Well, it's been going on since the 80s, and there's been kind of little waves here and there. 1983, I believe, was the first, what it's called an inversion, a corporate inversion. That's the technical word for it. We call it a desertion, basically where the American company is American in all respects, except it deserts us, reincorporates in this tax haven in order to avoid paying their fair share of taxes, and the American public actually obviously has to pick up the tab for them. Well, what's happened though. There's been about 75 of these inversions over the last 20 years or so, but it's accelerated dramatically in the last few years, and the reason is there's many companies have a lot of profits that are stashed offshore where they are going untaxed. When an American company makes money offshore, it is not that those profits are not taxed until they're essentially brought back into the United States. And our tax law lets them keep that money offshore and be untaxed, and they can use it however they want to use it offshore. And frankly, most of them have brought a lot of that money back, and they're investing it here in America. But technically, they don't pay taxes until they, under the IRS law, actually bring it back here officially. And so what's going on is they've got this money sitting offshore. They want to bring it back. They just don't want to pay what they're supposed to pay on it. And so rather than bring it back, they're using it to spend to do these acquisitions. And by doing these acquisitions, they're going to be able to avoid paying their taxes on the money that's offshore and on any future money they make. Because what they end up doing once they become a subsidiary of a company in Switzerland or Ireland or other tax havens is they make because money is able to transfer relatively easily in this modern economy. They make it look like their profits are no longer being generated here in America, but they're going to be generated in a tax haven where the tax rate is 10%, maybe 5%, and that's how they play the game. So they're still making money here in America. They're just making it look like they're not making any money.
Right, it's a shell game.
It's a shell game. They're making it look like they're making all their money in the tax haven where they don't have to pay much taxes on it.
And for me, again, it highlights the flaw in our tax system and the whole neoliberal push towards tearing down capital borders. For me, that would have, this is, as you said, something of the 80s and the 90s, to where I don't think it was possible in the 70s because we had capital borders. Money wasn't flowing across borders like it is today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
I'm just curious your thought. I mean, do you agree, disagree?
Well, I can't say that I know that much about the system that was in place back in the 70s. What I know now, though, I know fairly well, is that we have a very porous tax system that's not working for average Americans, and in a lot of ways it's not working for small businesses too. But it's really working very well for the rich and for big corporations. Those are folks who are able to, through loopholes and all sorts of subsidies and tax breaks, they're able to avoid paying, their fair share of taxes. Most of these companies that are doing these inversions, they're already paying taxes at maybe a 20%, maybe a 22% rate. I mean, they're all, they've got lobbying operations here in Washington demanding that the tax rate be lowered from 35% on corporate profits to 25%. Many of these companies are already paying less than 25%. They just want to take other advantages of incorporating these offshore,
right,
which is to be able to get access to this money that they've stashed over there that's untaxed, and to be able to, guarantee in the future they're going to have these much lower tax rates.
But on that repatriation, which is what you keep saying, all this money overseas, one of the things that catches my attention is the last time we did this, it kind of tells us what the future holds. The last time we allowed them to bring money back at a much lower tax rate, and maybe you'll agree or disagree, but the way I saw it is we saw companies buying back large amounts of their shares, pumping up their stock prices, CEOs giving themselves huge bonuses, and then laying off employees. It seemed like a whole lot of negative return for we the people, but for our investor class friends, very, very lucrative indeed.
Yes, it was a real raw deal for workers and for average taxpayers. I mean, the thing was sold back in 2004 as a major job creation proposal. The theory was these companies, back then they had about $800 billion sitting offshore. Now that's 10 years ago. Today they have $2 trillion sitting offshore. So they've more than 2.5 times as much as offshore now than was back then. So of that $800 billion, they brought back, but they went to Congress and they said, look, we want to bring this money here to America. We want to invest it. We want to create more jobs and grow the economy. So they made that promise. Congress even said, put some restrictions on how they could use the money. $300 billion came back. Major studies have been done of this and said basically they've looked at the companies, the biggest companies that brought the most money back. All of them, almost all of them, cut jobs. So there was a net job loss of about 50,000 as a result of that. These companies brought this money back and paid a 5% tax rate on it.
Right.
Okay, so the normal rate is 35%. They paid a 5% rate. So we lost a ton of money to the government. And so, but here they are, they're back again. And why are they back again? Because Congress did it 10 years ago. They want Congress to do it again, have expected Congress to do it again. So now they got $2 trillion sitting offshore. And Congress has been actually considering whether or not to do another, what's called repatriation tax holiday. Now, the way they, basically allow these companies to figure, well, if you're not going to do the repatriation holiday, then I'm going to do this desertion. I'm going to buy a foreign company and essentially no longer be a U.S. company and instead become a foreign company. That's how they'll get access to the money without bringing it back to America.
So let me ask you this then, because, and you're right, that's how it's playing out. Is there no way for us to say, well, we're not going to let you do that. We're going to tax you on it. Tax you on it anyway and not allow that loophole to exist. Or B, if you leave the country, you leave your access to our market. I mean, at some point, there's got to be, if we've given them all the carrots, we've got to pull out what's left, which is just the stick.
Well, yes, there is a very simple fix for this problem. Right now, I explained earlier, right now, the way the law is written, a company that is generating these profits offshore, it does not have to pay taxes on them until they're brought back to the United States. Now, that's a loophole that was created by Congress decades ago. They could close that loophole, and basically it would say, no matter where your profits are being generated, you have to pay taxes on those profits here in America this year. We'll give you credit for the taxes you're paying to the country where it's being generated, so you're not being taxed twice, but whatever's left over, whatever wasn't taxed by the foreign government according to what our tax structure is, we're going to tax you on here. That would stop this problem in its tracks. There'd be no incentive for these companies to keep this money offshore. It would be brought back here. We would be much flusher in terms of the revenue that's coming in to do things like invest in rebuilding our infrastructure. But why can't we get that passed? Well, two reasons. One, you got one party, the Republican Party, is lockstep against any kind of revenue, any kind of tax reform that's going to increase the amount that corporations or rich people have to pay in taxes. They're just set against that. Two is we have some challenges within the Democratic Party itself. They also have many campaign contributors that are influential with them and that have them concerned, scared about raising taxes on corporations to make them pay their fair share. We've got to change that. This is both a challenge in terms of legislating, lobbying members of Congress, getting them to do the right thing, but it's also a challenge politically, right? These issues need to be debated in the election. we are hopeful that this Walgreens issue, if they decide to go ahead and become a Swiss company, which they're going to decide within the next week or so, that if they do decide to do that, that will change the dynamic on this. That will then become something that the general public gets, that this is a hollowing out of America. This is our corner drugstore. This is sort of known as America's drugstore, and yet, and it doesn't even have any international business, right? It doesn't have any reason it needs to do this other than to dodge its taxes.
Yeah, because they're at the corner of healthy and happy, or at the corner of screw you and rip me off.
They've had multiple slogans in the past. They all run counter to what is about to happen if they decide to do this. It's a betrayal. Your listeners ought to feel betrayed by their local Walgreens store if the company decides to become Swiss. I like to call them Benedict Arnold corporations. We all remember from our I guess it was our grade school history lesson, we learned about Benedict Arnold, who during the Revolutionary War, he was first on our side, a guy from Connecticut, I think he was. He was actually pretty big in the army of the colonials, and he was first on our side, and then he switched sides and went to work for the British against the independence movement. So I feel like these American corporations are doing a similar thing in terms of being traitors to our cause here.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And, to me, as I've been saying the whole time, the only thing we should be hearing in a Walgreens store right now are crickets.
Crickets?
Yeah, crickets. There should be nothing going on there. There should be no one walking in the door. There should be silence. Because to me, that's the way that you look. I mean, these people are worried about their money. Well, if no one's going to your store, well, good luck. That $4 billion, we should make that a loss of $8 billion.
Yeah, well, it's important for folks to understand. A lot of folks don't fully understand how the tax system works or why it's important for these companies. I mean, there's two reasons why it's important for these companies to pay their fair share of taxes. One is it's just morally it's the right thing to do, right? It's repugnant that.
But hold on, whoa. But, I'll go back to my economics professor who said, corporations are not moral entities. They're specifically to make as much money as they can possibly make. You can't heap societal mores or morals upon them. They're only money-generating operations, and there are those in our government and our society who truly believe that. I'm not one of them, but that's that's what we've been fed for 30 years.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to think about or understand what kind of benefits do corporations like Walgreens get from operating here in America, right? I mean, besides customers who can afford to shop at their stores, they get an educated workforce. They ride, that educated workforce. Most of us are educated in public schools. That's on the taxpayer's dollar. These companies are moving their goods back and forth on public roads that we all pay for with our taxes. This Walgreens in particular, a quarter of its revenue is coming from taxpayers. Right. And that's because seniors go there with their Medicare card or their Medicaid card, and they buy drugs in order to, be healthy. And so a quarter of its revenue is coming from taxpayers already, and yet it wants to basically thumb its nose at those same taxpayers and say, well, I'll take your money and I'll make profits off of your government spending, but I'm not going to give a share of it back in terms of taxes. Well, that's just wrong.
So isn't that an avenue right there to say, you know what, as a country, we're not going to give you that quarter of your business and until you decide that you're going to get right with we the people?
Well, it's interesting. Just today, in fact, 4 members of Congress, 2 senators, 2 House members just introduced legislation today that says if a corporation wants to get government contracts, it cannot be a company that has gone through, deserted America and gone through this so-called corporate inversion where they've gave up their U.S. citizenship and became a foreign company. So there actually is now legislation introduced in Congress that would say you're not going to be able to get government contracts if that's the kind of company that you are. So there's different ways. People can vote with their feet and not give them business. But what we've got to get Congress to pass legislation. We've got to get people in Congress who are willing to be on the side of average Americans in terms of this fight. Right now, we all know the system's rigged. The rules are, the game is stacked against average people.
Yeah.
I worked for 10 years on campaign finance reform and lobbying reform here in Washington. This stuff is the special interests, rich and powerful. They control things too much. They've got too much influence over politicians. So unless we kind of clean up that mess, we're going to have some challenges fixing these loopholes.
Yeah, I mean, campaign finance laws. We definitely need to get money out of politics. But since you brought up, this law that they're trying to maybe pass in Congress, wouldn't that run afoul of our trade agreements by putting these kind of restrictions on companies? Maybe you have some insight that
not as far as I know. I mean, this is just a condition of a government contractor. It's not it's an interesting question now. What you're saying is because it now becomes a foreign company,
right?
Would it become a trade barrier? That's an interesting question. I don't know enough about trade law to know whether that would run afoul of agreements or not.
So let me ask you a last question. The $4 billion that we're talking about, what could we get out? What would that pay for? I mean, $4 billion is an awful lot of money. What would we lose potentially by them moving overseas? And I know you guys have this interesting infograph that says, 1.5 years of prescription drugs for the entire the Veterans Administration, veterans population, a year and a half of all of it. That's pretty huge.
Yeah, all of this is about trade-offs, right? I mean, if we lose this revenue, the rest of us have to pick up the tab, make up the difference for what corporations or wealthy folks aren't paying, or the deficit gets bigger. And so we did a comparison of this $4 billion over 5 years. We found that 3.5 million kids could get healthcare coverage under the Children's Health Insurance Program, so that's really very important. 1.5 million veterans who are getting service now under the Veterans Administration, their prescription drug costs would be paid for with this money. We also found that about 650,000 people could get Medicaid coverage. So many people depend on Medicaid, whether most of it's seniors, poor seniors, just people with disabilities who are dependent on Medicaid covering them. So there's a lot you could do with that money, and it's important for folks to think through kind of what are the trade-offs, what are we losing if companies and the rich aren't paying their fair share.
Yeah, but the guy, one of the billionaires here, Rubenstein, the guy for the billionaire here in the U.S., he might not get that third vacation home. I understand he's buying a beach home, $147 million. He needs that extra bit of change. So that's that. Frank Clemente, I appreciate you taking time for us. I appreciate the information, and thanks so much.
Take care. Cheers.
Executive Director of Americans for Tax Fairness, americansfortaxfairness.org, the website. Just click on Frank Clemente's name. It'll take you right to their website. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Nation. Got to have a celebration.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Did you scramble to get your taxes done this year, dashing to the mailbox at the last minute? Yeah, me too. I really don't mind paying what I owe, but I hate having to pay the taxes owed by the likes of J.P. Morgan Chase, Mitt Romney, Exxon, and Amazon. They're just a few of the astonishingly profitable corporations and super-rich financial hucksters who walk their tax tabs each year, thus putting the cost of everything from the military to our national parks onto our shoulders. We constantly hear CEOs and their congressional hirelings wail about the punishing tax rate of 35% assessed on corporate profits. But they're grinning as they're crying, for they know they actually pay nowhere near that. In fact, the latest assessment by the Government Accountability Office found that U.S. corporations pay an average tax rate of only 12.6%. forcing workaday taxpayers to cover the multiple billions of dollars that these privileged elites dodge. How do they do that? Simple. They duck through ridiculous loopholes in our tax laws. How ridiculous? Try the subsidy for corporate criminals. If you get a speeding ticket, do you get to deduct the fine from the income tax you owe? Ha, just try it. But J.P. Morgan Chase was fined more than $20 billion last year for major frauds and consumer rip-offs, and his honchos have now deducted that punishment from the corporate tax bill, claiming it as a cost of doing business. Oh, they also get to deduct the many millions of dollars they paid lawyers to defend their blatant wrongdoing. This is Jim Hightower saying, well, sniff the elites, we're merely making rightful use of the deductions allowed by tax laws. But it's their lawyers who wrote those laws to legalize their thievery. And need I mention that they also get a deduction for the mega salaries and expenses of those lawyers? So we pay for their wrongdoings, their fines, and their lawyers.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You know, I look at this, and you go back to this whole corporate avoidance, all of the power that we've given to these corporations over the years, all of the loopholes, all of the disincentive to push down and to fight and to make sure that workers don't have the ability to organize, all of the power that and really a lot of this started full force. I mean, it started during the Nixon years and worked its way through the 70s, but really took steam during the Reagan years. And you go and you look at this whole push towards more profits, more power, more corporate dominance, and this isn't surprising to me. You go back and you learn about this inversion. You go back to the Reagan years is when it came out. This is what the lobbyists wanted. This is what the corporate interests wanted to get them to come along. And this is what we get. So you look at a year and a half of prescriptions for all the veterans in this country. One company's going to walk away from that because they're making profits here. It's not like we're taking their core money. It's not like we're taking their this is profit that's being taxed. And you're talking about this is a very profitable company, and it's very profitable because as Frank said, a quarter of their business is Medicare. A quarter of their business comes from my grandmother getting her prescription drugs. Think about that for a second. What an absolute, I don't know. Sometimes you just sit and you wonder what we think as a population. And like I said, there should be nothing but crickets in Walgreens right now until they get the message that, you know what? Playing the on the corner of healthy and happy? No. This is on the corner of screw job and ripoff. This is not in the best interest of we the people. And I suggest you check out the website, AmericansForTaxFairness.org. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. It has extensive stories on this, what $4 billion could buy, what it would mean if we allow this offshoring to continue, lots of stuff. And for me, it's the millions of dollars also that they extorted out of the taxpayers of Illinois. I mean, that's something else that nobody's really talking about either, and it's frustrating. So I would suggest don't go to Walgreens. I would also suggest calling your congressman, your senator, your whoever. Call. Say, hey, we need to be holding these companies accountable, all of them. This should be an election year issue, absolutely. And maybe change the tax code so that they can't keep hoarding money overseas and then giving us the same old nonsense line. Oh, we'll bring it back. We'll create jobs. We promise. Yeah, nonsense. Right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Detroit's bankruptcy trial begins August 14th. Detroit retired and active city workers voted to accept pension cuts of 4.5% plus loss of cost of living increases, because even heavier cuts were possible if they voted against these cuts. Their pensions average $19,000 to $20,000 a year. Police and firefighters voted to accept losing part of their pension cost of living raises. Police and fire pensions in Detroit average $32,000 a year. The federal bankruptcy seeks to eliminate or drastically cut $18 billion in debt. The pension cuts are being forced on Detroit workers, even though the state constitution says that public worker pensions can't be cut. The federal bankruptcy judge ruled that federal bankruptcy law trumps that state pensions cut prohibition. Michigan's attorney general has publicly said he disagrees with the judge's ruling, but he's not using his office to legally challenge the ruling. U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin agrees with the AFGE, the union representing frontline Veterans Affairs caregivers, that staffing shortages are a big reason why so many veterans have such long waits for health care. Senator Baldwin has introduced a bill to increase VA staffing.
The reason for the long waits is that the VA in some areas is woefully understaffed. There are not enough physicians and other healthcare providers for the very significant needs that our veterans present today. The bill that I've introduced tries to essentially leverage greater health care availability in the VA by permitting the Veterans Health Services to hire more medical residents.
The Medicare Trust Fund is solvent until 2030, 4 years longer than was projected last year. The trustees' report released Monday cited the Affordable Care Act and its various cost savings reforms as a major contributing factor to the longer solvency for Medicare. The report says the healthcare law known as Obamacare included provisions aimed at reducing costs, increasing revenues, and combating fraud and abuse. A new study published in the New England Journal of Medicine estimates that over 10 million adults gained health insurance due to the Affordable Care Act. States that expanded Medicaid under the health care reform law saw significant coverage gains for low-income people 18 to 64 years old. The study found similar results to one by Gallup and the estimates from the Congressional Budget Office.
Workers Independent News is brought to you with support from union-owned, union-represented Bank of Labor. Bank of Labor has provided trust and fiduciary services to labor organizations for nearly a century. Online at bankoflabor.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
All because the gays are getting married, that is why people die and children go unfed. When I'm sad and alone and I'm wondering just why everything about my life is feeling like it's going down a toilet bowl. It's good to know it's cause the gays.
Yeah, welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Yes, we can blame them for everything. Everything is their fault. Didn't you know that? At least that's what I keep being told, especially from my my straight white guy friends who want to identify them as such. And if you're in the Columbus area, in Columbus, Ohio, evidently at the Goodale Park on September the 20th, from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., there's going to be this Straight White Guy Festival, which I don't know if it's real, if it's a joke. I just think it's kind of funny. To me, it is a joke. But I say let them have their festival. Let them stand around and look at each other. and then answer the question of why there's just a bunch of white guys standing around in a park if they're not gay. Just a thought. Anyway, here to talk a little bit about the big festival, or maybe not. I think this is just a joke. I think it's something just to get people talking about it from the crazy cash side. But also to talk about this insane website that has come up. I've asked Luke Brinker. He is a researcher at Equality Matters. He's written a piece, When a Hate Group Creates Its Own Conservative News Site. We've got a link to his article over at thericksmithshow.com. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you think of this straight white guy festival?
Well, it kind of sounds like an act of supreme trolling to me. But, like you said, if you want to have your festival and celebrate who you are, that's perfectly fine, and that's your right. I mean, I would suggest that, if Gay Pride Week is 1 week out of the year, I'd say the way a lot of gay people said, the other 358 days are sort of the straight white guy days. But go right ahead, have your festival.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset, have whatever, as long as you do whatever it is you want to do. I'm very libertarian in that mindset. You're right. You have the right to do whatever you want until your rights infringe upon mine. Then we may have some problems. But have your festival.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it seems like usually with these sorts of activities and events that these people are putting on, it's not so much about being proud of who they are and upholding, their own identity as it is about saying, who they aren't and what they're against. But again, that's their right.
Or the other part of it for me is it's about making money, because to me, a lot of this stuff, and this website that you bring up, this barbedwire.com, which, I took a look at, and it looks more like a let's try and sell stupid, ignorant people products that prove that they're stupid and ignorant so that we can make money. That's really what all of this seems. And as I said earlier in the show, the right and these kind of hate mongers are masterful at selling products and getting people to give them tons of money.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Barbed Wire is this new site that was started by Matt Barber, who works for Liberty Counsel, which is a right-wing legal organization. And in addition to offering a lot of sort of crazy stories about, why we should impeach Obama or why gay people want to establish a homo-fascist tyranny, they also have an email list, which in theory is supposed to be about getting news updates, but which they're using to hawk all kinds of sort of tacky right-wing merchandise. You can get an Obama countdown clock. There's a garden gnome holding an assault rifle and Don't Tread on Me material, a book with a foreword by Ted Nugent about hunting. So, you can get all kinds of stuff that way. But it's just as much about making money as it is about, all these other conservative ideas that they claim to be promoting.
It's funny to me, I look at these sites and the people who do this kind of stuff, and my first thought when I looked at the site, because I read your article and then I went to the site and I go, the first thing that popped in my mind is questioning whether the guy who came up with it was a closeted gay guy himself.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a crazy site. I mean, this is sort of the site that you would go to if you think that Fox News has gone a little soft. And they do really have sort of this preternatural obsession with homosexuality. It's not only about the LGBT movement, but a huge bulk of their content is focused on that, and they tend to spend a lot of time just obsessing over these weird, questions of what the consequences of gay marriage are. They spend a lot of time talking about incest and pedophilia, so going down rabbit holes that, not everyone wants to go down, but they're more than happy to.
Or, my thought is some of I knew a guy a number of years ago who was probably one of the most homophobic guys I've ever met, and outwardly so. Oddly enough, you find in the newspaper, a couple years later, that he was in the woods somewhere, got caught with a bunch of other guys like him, performing same-sex acts, and you go, but I thought you were, and oddly enough. The ones who, and maybe this is just how it is, the ones who are the most outspoken, the ones pointing the finger, as my mother always said, with the three fingers pointing back at them, maybe that's their problem.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I mean, I'm a gay guy, and it seems to me that a lot of these people seem to think more about gay sex and what gay people do than I do. So it is kind of curious to me.
It's very, very strange. But the other part of this is these are the same people who talk about the Constitution. These are the same people who are, we believe in the Constitution, except for that, equality thing. All men created equal, and all of that. The whole everybody's equal under the eyes of the law kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they talk so much about liberty, which, is pretty bizarre given that they sort of, promote this worldview where gay people are stripped of their rights, where women are stripped of their rights. But to them, it's mostly the liberty to impose their own dogmas on the rest of the population. That's, I think, what they're really after. And if you look at a site like barbedwire.com, you see article after article about how liberals are trying to impose tyranny on the country, how Obama is essentially a dictator. But then, the policies that they're trying to promote of, reinstating sodomy laws, of stripping gay marriage, of, denying basic rights to women, that, I think, is what most people would consider to be tyranny. But the people who talk the loudest about liberty, it seems, are really, at the end of the day, the most willing to take it away from everybody else.
Well, what's interesting to me is you've got people who follow this stuff, and it's kind of a brainwashing effect. Where just the other day I was talking about a survey, a study that was done that that showed people who were ideologically predisposed to one series of thought. When you would try and convince them that what it was that they were thinking was actually wrong, factually wrong, they actually dug in deeper. And I look at this website kind of in that light, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this barbed wire and sites like it are sort of a convenient way for real ideological people to just avoid even having to confront those opposing views. Of course, they might face them out in the real world, and then their response is to dig in even more, and then they have sites like barbed wire where they aren't even presented with the other side, and where the problem is always Obama, the problem is always women, the problem is always the LGBT movement, and those are the people who just are destroying America, and the solution is to shut them out of the national dialogue.
But with a heavy dose of we need to make profits and lots of advertising and lots of trinkets, and that's the part that gets me, that maybe I just don't do well enough. How do you? And this is where I give them credit on a certain level, where they've figured out how to take their hate and profit from it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a heavy emphasis on the bottom line and the profit motive that's inherent in conservatism, and just because these people happen to focus most of the time on, some of the more social and cultural issues doesn't necessarily mean that they've forgotten the dollar signs at the end of the day. And one of the things that might surprise some people, but, wouldn't necessarily surprise you if you follow these things for a living, is that, this site seems to be like the truest of true believers. They are committed to some pretty crazy ideas, but there's still this sort of inherent cynicism there where they're going to still try to sort of squeeze money out of people who don't know any better, who go to their site for news and then end up getting these newsletters basically asking for their money. So at the end of the day, I think this is as much of a money-making scheme as it is about the news are offering an alternative set of opinions.
And that was exactly my assessment of it. So for me, the last line of questioning I wanted to go into, for me, I would like to know who the people are so we can, because back in the old days, when I was a kid, you knew who the racists were because they were using the racist language. You knew who the homophobes were because they were using the. We've kind of gotten in this where we're really kind of suppressing that language. I would prefer that people use those words so I know who they are. They identified themselves, and maybe through websites like this, we'll maybe find out who among our friends are the idiots.
Right. Well, Matt Barber, who started the site, actually makes it pretty easy for you. I was at a conference actually about a month ago here in D.C., and I was sitting in on a panel that he was speaking on, and he explicitly said that he is proud to be called a hater and a homophobe. Now, he said that's because the Bible commands him to be a hater and a homophobe because, all of these ancient prescriptions on sexuality that he interprets a certain way. And so he has been pretty clear about what his agenda is. And the contributors to the site have been pretty clear about what their agenda is. It publishes the work of Scott Lively. Some of your listeners may be aware of legislation in Uganda that imposes prison for homosexuality. Well, there was an earlier version of that bill that would have actually imposed the death penalty. And Scott Lively is an American pastor who went over to Uganda and was sort of working with the people who drafted that legislation. Would seem to make him sort of a fringe persona non grata in the United States, but he's more than welcome to contribute at Barbed Wire.
Wow.
And it's people like that who have not just a crazy worldview, but really one that is pretty dangerous and that has had some real consequences for people's lives, who nevertheless have a forum at sites like these to spew their bigotry.
Sad stuff. But here's the bottom line. I'm glad that they have a site, to be honest, so that we know where they are, we know what they're saying, and we can kind of focus on this is not what we as a country really want. At least that's my thought on it.
Well, it is sort of an unfiltered view of the conservative id. You know, people like Matt Barber and his boss at Liberty Counsel, Matt Saver, they've been on Fox News before, but even like Fox News can only go so far before people just don't even think of taking them seriously. So, you know, they'll not necessarily say that they're proud to be homophobic. They'll talk about religious liberty, all of these other abstract concepts. But at Barbed Wire, you really sort of get an up-close, warts-and-all look at the bigotry and really the hatred that motivate a lot of these people.
Well, I'll tell you, looking at this website, it's there. All the bigotry and all the hatred right there front and center. Anyway, the article, barbedwire.com, when a hate group creates its own conservative quote-unquote news site, written by Luke Brinker. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Luke's name. You can take a look at the site yourself. Get your own thoughts. Some crazy stuff. Luke, I appreciate you taking time for us, talking about the work that you're doing. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We gotta do it today. No more madness than blue. No more misery. We gotta get over tonight.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It's time for the world in 2. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations. After more than a week of shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon are back on American soil, and the fighting between Hamas and Israel continues unabated. There was a brief 12-hour pause in fighting on Saturday, but negotiations to extend that ceasefire failed. Ban Ki-moon told reporters today what he thought was holding back a lasting cessation of hostilities.
It's a matter of their political will. They have to show their humanity as leaders, both Israeli and Palestinians. And particularly when they continue to fight, then it's only the people, only the civilians, helpless civilians, who are being suffered and killed.
Switching to Ukraine, the front lines of fighting between the Ukrainian army and pro-Russian separatists are nearing the site of downed Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Over the weekend, an offensive by the Ukrainian armed forces left dozens of rebels dead, and Kiev said today their troops had retaken a portion of the crash site. That would constitute a meaningful military victory, but would also appear to be a violation of a United Nations Security Council resolution passed last week that ordered the cessation of all fighting within a wide radius around the debris. Here's Russia's UN Ambassador Vitaly Churkin this afternoon.
President Poroshenko promised that there will be no activity of Ukrainian military within the radius of 40 kilometers. That did continue, and that fighting did not allow the international investigators and those who are supposed to accompany them for the purposes of protection to reach the crash site.
For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome to the new dark ages. Yeah, I hope you're living right. These are the new dark ages. And the world might end tonight.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Yeah, I was thinking about that during the break. The straight white guy, the straight white guy convention, or the big celebration, and I go, really, that's got to be the troll of the century, because I don't know who would go. You're gonna get a bunch of guys who are gonna show up and do what? Just seems odd to me. Anyway, welcome back to the program. Good number. The NRA very happy today. A court in Florida upheld the Florida law. You may remember, it was the American Medical Association a couple years ago, and I had talked about this, I guess 2 or 3 years ago, where the AMA said that pediatricians should be talking to parents about, do you have a firearm in the house? Understand kids find these things, because first-time parents may not think of it. Just a thought. So the AMA was telling pediatricians, maybe this is something you bring up as part of your conversation with new parents. Well, the legislature in Florida passed a law that precludes them from doing that and actually would punish them. It is known as the physician's gag rule, and punishes the doctors for talking about guns. The Federal Appeals Court in Florida upheld that law. The National Rifle Association, pretty happy with themselves, I'm sure. Because why would you want to educate young parents? And why would you want people to think about having the gun thing in the house? And I got a number of emails from people yesterday, and talking about the topless women who were harassing the poor gun toters, which I found very, very funny. And they were all on the positive side, because I'm a firm believer of, I just because I'm a guy, I'm not against women going around topless. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all, from my perspective. But I think it's funny, though, that when I went back and I watched the video, and someone pointed this out, that the guy who was shooting this one video kept saying, are you afraid of seeing them? And the woman's like, are you afraid of seeing them either? And neither would seem to answer the question, which made me think, if I'm a guy, I'm like, well, I don't care. Why does that matter to me? I'm okay with it. It was just a weird little dynamic in the confrontation that went on between these two folks that I found, and so did a couple of people who emailed me, found rather humorous. It just makes me laugh. NRA spokesman, guy named Brian Judy, he was at a big gun rally there in Silverdale, Washington. Was there last Wednesday, because they're opposing this initiative 594. In November, this 594 will be on the ballot to require everyone who buys a gun to pass a background check. They have initiative and referendum there in Washington State, and one of the things that the people have said, hey, let's put this to a vote. Let's see how many people are in favor of it. Let's see if this is something that we want. And interestingly enough, according to Will Freeman, who wrote an article over at Think Progress, this Brian Judy guy made a comparison between background checks and Nazi Germany, and then ridiculed Jews who he said supported gun safety measures, which I just kind of find interesting. And then he went after a billionaire who, if you remember talking about this Nick Hanauer's article on that he sees pitchforks coming, that they should support minimum wage and things that help workers do a little bit better because he doesn't want to see pitchforks. Mr. Judy asked the question, why does a small group of billionaires want to register handguns? He says, I know where they want to go. We watched these people for 30 years. They want to ban them. They want to register them first so they know where to get them. He says these billionaire plutocrats want to get rid of handguns when things do go loose, that the people only have pitchforks to come after them. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, the whole speech, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, was just kind of twisted in making these weird kind of very, very strange comparisons to each other. And, why you would ask the crowd, the same policies that led to his family getting run out of Germany, talking about this Hanauer, were the policies of the Nazis. You kind of go, really, did you have to go there? And, if you look at, this article I read because there's always this belief, and I've heard this a number of times, that the Nazis, that under Hitler, they wanted stricter gun laws, and they were coming to get the guns. But I read this article in Salon that kind of changes that thought, because it didn't happen. The whole Holocaust idea didn't start with gun safety. According to the Salon article, Hitler, signed this law in 1938 that actually reversed Germany's very strict gun laws. And in fact, as they point out, deregulated the sale of rifles, shotguns, and ammunition for Germans. So this idea that it was restrictive was kind of, I don't know. Hitler also lowered the legal gun ownership age from 20 to 18, according to the article. And I guess that, it's one of those things that it's not that you just don't get things wrong, it's that you lied. And it kind of makes me wonder that, you look at a lot of the propaganda that we're sold, common sense seems to fall out of it. Look, I'm not in favor of people taking guns away from everyone. I'd like you to have your gun. Fine, have your gun. But you also have to be responsible for it. And that's the other part of it that we don't get. And how many times I see this, the Second Amendment. I go, yeah, it starts with in a well-regulated militia. Are you in a militia? Well, no. Then I don't know what to tell you. But I guess, we've been fed our ideological aims. I'm not anti-gun. Never have been. I've shot guns before. Okay, I don't get the charge that some people, I've gone with some people who just, they get all charged up. I'm not one of those folks. But it'll be interesting to see in the coming weeks and months, because this stuff is not going to go away anytime soon. And I'm just waiting for that one spark where you have these open carry idiots who are walking into restaurants, and you have these people who are pushing the envelope. And it's whenever you start pushing, when do you go too far? When does that spark happen? I don't know. But it will certainly be interesting. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, Talk Radio News Service. Stick around. Right back after this.
We want the world and we want it now. We're going to take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
John Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
The production is going to increase. Our safety standards have to increase with it.
New rules for explosive oil trains. Big win in Maine over big tar sands oil. Plus,
and on the subject of climate change, U.S. citizens revealed themselves to be more divided than any other nation.
We're number one. America leads the world in global warming denial.
Thanks, Rush. All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
It's ironically humorous.
Yes, it is, Rush. In just the same way that the idea of thousands, if not millions of people dying from droughts, fires, storms, floods is ironically hysterical. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, as we go to air today, breaking news out of Virginia. 2 people were killed and at least 26 others injured on Thursday after a powerful storm swept through a campground filled with vacationing families. The storm brought heavy rains, fierce winds, baseball-sized hail, snapped towering trees, sending some crashing onto tents, campers, and cars at the Cherrystone Family Camping Resort in Cape Charles, north of Norfolk. One of the campers, Jordan Burtock, tweeted, "Just lived through a tornado. Children are missing. People are dead. Trees are down. Campers are flipped."
Yes, it was a really stunning, powerful storm that came up so quickly. The National Weather Service had not yet even issued a tornado watch. They did issue a tornado warning, but they only had about 20 minutes of warning before it hit.
So what kind of cheery news do you have for us today, Des?
Well, let's see. How about new rules for oil trains?
Sounds like fun.
After a rash of oil train explosions amid the U.S. drilling boom, including one in Canada last year that incinerated the downtown of Lac Megantic and killed 47 people, well, now the Obama administration has proposed new rules to phase out within 2 years a type of rail car that is prone to rupture. Transportation Secretary Anthony Fox defended the proposed rules in an interview with PBS NewsHour.
Crude by rail shipments have increased from 2008 for 9,500 carloads to more than 415,000 carloads, a 4,000% increase. So the production is going to increase. Our safety standards have to increase with it.
The proposed rules include new speed limits and flammability testing for North Dakota's Bakken shale oil. Now, while the railroad industry is receptive to the new rules, the oil industry is not, because it will raise their shipping costs. Ron Ness of the North Dakota Petroleum Council seems to think the danger is overstated.
At 99.7% of the time, rail movements get to their destination safely.
Oh, well, that's good. 99.7% of the time. Why complain? Rachel Maddow spoke about the lobbying against new rules for these oil bomb trains just a few months ago.
Lobbyists for the rail car manufacturers said the same thing. These rail cars are getting a bad rap. They're totally fine. We swear we love explosions.
Score one for the little guy over big oil. The City Council of tiny South Portland, Maine has voted to block the use of its port to load and ship heavy tar sands oil from Canada over concerns about pollution, oil spills, and climate change. The ban passed despite a massive oil industry PR campaign that reportedly spent over $700,000 in advertising in the small town of just 25,000 people and even bussed in supporters to City Council meetings. The American Petroleum Institute is threatening to sue to force the town to allow the shipments.
Of course they are. This is the case where they're trying to figure out how to get these tar sands out of the country. With Keystone XL potentially being blocked, they're looking at reversing a pipeline which currently goes from the East Coast up to Canada. They want to reverse it to send the tar sands out through Maine, and that's what the town is trying to block.
Yep. We're number one. Americans lead the world in global warming denial. In a broad survey of public opinion conducted by Ipsos Mori across 20 developed countries, the United States is the most climate change denying nation on the planet, with the highest percentage of people who reject the global scientific consensus that humans are causing dangerous global warming. Naturally, right-wing radio host Rush Limbaugh takes credit for dumbing down America.
Why would the U.S. be the leading nation with the highest amount of doubt about the conventional wisdom of climate? Why do you think that would be? I think that's exactly right. Me.
Yes, you, Rush. More specifically, the fact that America has more corporate radio than any other nation in the world, I suspect. So, of course, we hear more of the corporate lies from the fossil fuel industry through their mouthpiece known as Rush Limbaugh.
There are signs of change, however. A new Media Matters analysis finds that in the first 6 months of this year, the network news shows covered climate change as much as they did in the last 4 years combined.
That would be good news as long as you don't pay attention to how little they covered it in the last 4 years combined.
Trying to look for the good news.
Ever the optimist. For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to in this busy news day, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. While you're there, please consider a donation to help keep the Green News Report on your public airwaves. Someone's got to fight against Rush. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
What do you say about his companies? What do you say about society?
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Brian sent me an email during the break saying he's going to be in Columbus in September. Wanted to know the day, September 20th, actually, Brian, because he wants to attend. He wants to attend the Straight White Guy Festival. Well, yeah, Brian, if you go September 20th, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., if it actually happens, I think it's just a troll. Please, I need to know what it was like. Tell me what kind of festivities all of the straight white guys had. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in Washington, D.C. and around the world. Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. How are you?
I'm good. Just having a kind of a chuckle over. I think it's a troll. That in Columbus, there's a story running around that on September 20th there's going to be a Straight White Guys Festival. Which
in Columbus, Ohio?
Yeah, Columbus, Ohio.
I'm 30 miles. My home is from there. I haven't heard of anything.
Well, good. So you may be attending, right?
I'm 30 miles exactly from there. And what is this supposed to be?
They don't say. There's just a flyer. Evidently, there have been some flyers around the city that are promoting the Straight White Guy Festival.
Because they just had a Pride Parade, and they have a Doodah Festival, which is just you come, just strange dress, just kind of goofy stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And but I don't know what that is.
I would guess it's a pushback to the Gay Pride Parade. Because somebody's feeling unloved.
I just looked up at WBNS is reporting it, and yeah, right. It's at Goodale Park. That's the park where they host the annual Gay Pride Parade.
Okay, so that's I said it was a troll, and I'm sure it probably is because I don't know many people or many sane people who are going to go. Look, I'm a straight white guy. Nothing to offer. I don't have a political stance there.
Michael Primo of Why Marriage Matters in Ohio, who would be against gay marriage, for example, equality marriage. He says, quote, straight white people are doing just fine. So it's somebody that's right. I see the sign, free admission, everybody's welcome.
There you go.
All right.
So then let me ask you this then. So if everybody's welcome, would white not straight guys be allowed to come?
Probably. I think this is somebody just yanking everybody around.
It's a troll. And that's what I thought. It's just another one of these troll things. Right. But hey, Brian, if you're in Columbus and if it actually goes on, I most certainly would like to get the report and find out what was there.
Maybe we can get some still pictures.
There you go. There you go. Maybe there'll be some audio. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world. I understand that Boehner's saying that the whole impeachment thing not their doing.
No, he's trying to. He's really trying to downplay this because the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee raised $7.4 million since he filed his lawsuit, and they raised $1 million in one day. Also, 74,000 new contributors to the Democratic side at basically an average of $19 each. And the reason is because they're saying, well, you know, there's this impeachment talk. Now, Boehner himself's trying to squash that because, you know, of course, Sarah Palin said it.
Right.
And he's, I think, worried about how much money that the Democratic side will raise.
And Sarah Palin, whatever comes out of her mouth is absolute gospel, right? Because she's gonna. Do you know she's gonna have her own online TV network?
I actually heard a clip. In fact, somebody on one of the radio shows I do today said, "Now come on, you subscribed, didn't you?" And I said, if it was free, I'd tune in, but for $9.95 a month, I will do something else with my money. But he actually played me what she was saying on it, and I can't imagine all day. What would you do on it? Just talk?
Yeah,
seriously. I mean,
I would look at the one speech. Did you see the speech she gave over the weekend?
No.
Where it appeared she was bombed. I mean, she was slurring her words and she was grasping for ideas, and it was really kind of comical. That I would watch. I wouldn't pay for it, but like I did watch it.
Well, I haven't seen, you know, like I said, I haven't seen the channel, but he played a clip, and it was, I know, I just thought in my mind, what do you talk on her, meaning her, do you talk on that channel for 8 hours a day?
Oh, she's not going to do that kind of work. Come on.
Can't. No, I was going to say you can't do that.
Get out of here. She's going to have a whole bunch of other people do the work, and she'll just put her name to it. You know, she's looking at the Beck thing, and I got to be honest. I think Beck has done it right. I don't agree with him or anything he says, but I think from the business model that they've set up, I think they're cornering that market that Palin, I think, is trying to get in on.
Mm-hmm. It's a money thing, or it keeps her visibility out there amongst the party faithfuls.
See, my thought is that Fox News is about to dump her, and she needs somewhere to go.
For the visibility aspect, at least. If not the money, the visibility aspect.
So you're not going to sign up for Sarah TV or Barracuda. Is there a name yet?
No, I don't think. But although I will tell you, personal opinion, but I still think she was a better candidate than John McCain. That's saying anything.
Wow.
Sorry, I always did say that.
Well, she was better to look at anyway.
Like that line, you know, I knew with the debate, I knew John Kennedy, well, I knew John McCain, so I'd have to vote for Sarah Palin if forced.
Ouch. So you're not going to get the Sarah TV. How about, are you going to get on Reagan Book?
What's that?
It's the Ronald Reagan version of Facebook. It's Facebook for conservatives.
I'm out of the loop. I do surf, Truth Out.
Sure.
I watch Fox News and Truth Out, and I have some colleagues here and there, and they'll in the media, and they'll say, well, I'm not going on those sites. And I said, well, if you're reporting the news and you don't surf all this stuff, you're hurting yourself.
Yes.
You might as well see what everybody under the sun's saying.
No, I want to know what crazy's saying, so I can say they're crazy. If you don't know what they're saying, how can you point it out?
Don't know. That's right.
Oh, wow. So the Democrats are making a lot of money off of this, and Boehner's trying to walk away from it because personally, I agree with your assessment of the lawsuit. That was the impeachment. I don't think that they want to go through the public, actual impeachment, because I think it'll kill them. It'll hurt them like it did the last time.
Oh, impeachment would be a death penalty. I mean, the political death penalty. There cannot be. That's why Boehner fights this. There can't be anything like that. I still think the lawsuit has backfired and will continue to backfire, for a lot of reasons, but also the conservative, and I've seen, some of the blogs, they've come out and just attacked Boehner to death, the conservatives, for doing the lawsuit, which is amazing.
Yeah, I love watching here in Pennsylvania, the Republican Party's eating themselves. So I love it when the Republicans are eating themselves.
Well, when you think about it, if the government and the powers to be stay towards legislation, introducing their point of view, doing the drumbeat, and whether people like her, look, the contract with America was a mantra of 10 things that they focused on.
Right.
That when you looked at them weren't, the end of the day things. The government has to live under the same rules as itself, balancing the budget.
Some of that.
They had something. This stuff with the lawsuit, Rick, as you know, is just going way, way out in outer space.
Well, since you brought that up, since you brought the contract on America up, this because welfare reform was part of that, right?
Right.
How do you, and you voted for that, right?
Right.
How do you feel?
I remind Ellen Ratner, Bill Clinton signed it.
Exactly. No. Look, it's one of the number.
No, I have to remind Ellen of that.
Okay. No, I get it. One of the many things that I have a problem with Bill Clinton on, the telecom bill, NAFTA, the welfare reform, all of that. I just wanted to get your thought on, and I don't know if you saw the story in South Carolina. There's another one in Arizona. Where you've got these people who've been pushed into the low-wage workforce. Both women worked at McDonald's. The one woman in South Carolina, sent her 9-year-old to the park to play with a cell phone while she went to work. She was arrested because she didn't provide child care. I'm curious, in that, because I blame the welfare reform stuff for that, by not getting people the ability to get child care. I'm curious your thought.
Well, I think that may be possible, but I have a little bit different theory of in general why some of this is happening. There was a sheep farmer and his wife. They went to Kentucky to get some sheep, and they ran into a storm, and their 16-year-old daughter was with their 10-year-old son, and they didn't come back that night. The family was reported. They tried to take the kids away from them. And, I can give you case after case. I think it's a combination of if you don't have child care provided, then it's bad. You have to have a form of child care provided. Now, but in a lot of cases, people still can get the child care on welfare. But I think in general, there's this whole what do I want to say, police mentality, or everybody's being called in for everything, and there was a famous star, Will Smith, and his daughter was sitting on a bed, and her boyfriend had his shirt off, and he was 21, and she was 17, I think she was, and they're going through children's services now with him.
No, I think she was 13.
Was she 13?
Yeah, Jada Pinkett Smith. I think the story was she was like 13, and I don't know that was her boyfriend per se. But I do remember the picture and going, there's a pretty decent sized gap in age. And the mother said this wasn't sexual. They were just hanging out.
Sitting there. But maybe I've used a bad, maybe a not clear-cut example, but I'm just saying that there's such a mentality today. And you have to stand up and protect people, don't get me wrong. There seems to be such a mentality today of going after people for things that are pretty gray.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because I think, because what I've been talking about the South Carolina story, at least, here's this woman at work, her 9-year-old's at the park with a cell phone, not in danger. When I was a kid growing up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, there were, I was a kindergartner walking, a mile home through basically what was, I would say, is almost a war zone. There was nobody coming to arrest my mother, nor should they have. I think it's a cultural thing, but also I blame the, pushing all of these single mothers into the workforce without much of an opportunity to get them child care that they need.
Yeah, I don't know her case, but in a lot of cases, you have the opportunity to have the child care. Of course, I still think, though, that, I don't know, when we, back, in the 1996-98 era, with President Clinton, we still, we didn't let them get Head Start. We didn't let the Republicans do certain things. We still protected some legal service things, and try to do some of it. It just seems today the budget's not balanced, and then they're still cutting everything to death. I don't know. There's no balance to anything.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just looked up the story. The girl was 13. The guy was 20. According to the reports, and they're just friends. It was a friend of the family kind of thing. But I think you're right. I mean, we've gone to this idea of helicopter parents, where kids don't do anything like they did when I was a kid, and I'm sure not like when you were a kid. Let's move along. New VA secretary, huh?
Yeah, McDonald. I was asked the question today, and I really can't answer this. Is it that he's so good that he got a 97-0 vote, or is it the fact that they just really need to do something with somebody, that's decently qualified? And probably the second one, he ran Procter & Gamble, multi-international corporation, but he's got military experience. But I don't think it's that he's, you know, the most famous, well-known wow superstar that's around. He's got some decent credentials, but I also think they were looking for somebody that can be maybe balanced and come in and has military business experience and try to do something with this, you know, nightmare that's occurred. And Bernie Sanders, on the heels of it, has a very good piece of legislation. It funds $17 billion and does, you know, a variety of things to begin a change.
Yeah, I mean we've got to be doing something. I mean, I've been saying for the longest time, you know, if we're going to put folks in harm's way, if we're going to put them on pedestals and call them heroes, we should treat them as such.
Well, they've been underfunded forever and a day, and this is nothing new. Now, some of the things that went on of how it was ran, you know, has come to light, but the funding itself, you know, you're either going to make these centers to the top of the line and make them, you know, like a private hospital would be, or you've got to outsource some of the services if you don't have them.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of what Sanders' legislation does, right?
He's doing a mixture. If you're 40 miles away from a certain hospital and you don't have services, you can go to a doctor or another hospital. It's paid for, and it allows the VA to start contracting. So let's say in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, VA hospital doesn't have a certain expertise of some type, then they could contract with, say, Allegheny General. You know, they could contract with the hospital, and they can get that service done there and pay for the veterans.
Right, but
So,
couldn't you make the argument that this is the beginning of the destruction of the VA then? That then everything will begin contracting out, and then that's the end of it. And which
Well,
I got to be honest, is to me there should be one healthcare system in the country. We shouldn't have all of these different programs. Just my thought.
Oh, I think this is, and you've asked a great question. You're the second person only today that has asked this question of all the stations I've done, and that's the jackpot, because yes, I do. I think this is the beginning of a huge transformation of the VA system. Some would say they're undoing the VA, but I think it's the beginning of putting everybody into one umbrella. It's just the fact that, you know, we will pay for those veterans. They will be paid for. There's not going to be a bunch of insurance fights and arguments over how much you pay for them.
Right, and that to me is a good thing. But it's always been my mindset that we should have one healthcare system that we're all in,
right?
So that we all have a stake in it and making it the best that it can possibly be, instead of saying, oh, we're going to pander to this group and this group and this group, and Band-Aids here and there.
That's right, and people have been afraid to do this for years. They've seriously been afraid to be painted anti-veteran.
Yep.
And everybody in D.C. knows what I'm saying here if they admit it. They've all known they have to head this direction. They've just been afraid to do it.
Now, and this to me is a step in the right direction, because I remember as a kid growing up in Cleveland, you know, people would tell me about going to the VA hospitals, and it was drudgery for them because they were so badly funded, and the conditions were not great. Now this is back in the 70s and 80s, but I remember going, wow, that's what we do to the people we call heroes. Wow.
Yeah, I was on the VA committee in the House, and it was, you know, a lot of terrible things that happen, and trying to get veterans on the disability list. Good luck.
Yeah. Hopefully this will solve some of those problems. Bob, always great talking with you. Again, if September 20th you're in Columbus, please stop by the Straight.
I'll grab a couple of photos, see what we come up with.
Thanks so much, Bob.
All right, thanks.
Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back. Let's wrap this thing up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
Did you scramble to get your taxes done this year, dashing to the mailbox? Yeah, me too. I really don't mind paying what I owe, but I hate having to pay the taxes owed by the likes of J.P. Morgan Chase, Mitt Romney, Exxon, and Amazon. They're just a few of the astonishingly profitable corporations and super-rich financial hucksters who walk their tax tabs each year, thus putting the cost of everything from the military to our national parks onto our shoulders. We constantly hear CEOs and their congressional hirelings wail about the punishing tax rate of 35% assessed on corporate profits. But they're grinning as they're crying, for they know they actually pay nowhere near that. In fact, the latest assessment by the Government Accountability Office found that U.S. corporations pay an average tax rate of only 12.6%, forcing workaday taxpayers to cover the multiple billions of dollars that these privileged elites dodge. How do they do that? Simple. They duck through ridiculous loopholes in our tax laws. How ridiculous? Try the subsidy for corporate criminals. If you get a speeding ticket, do you get to deduct the fine from the income tax you owe? Ha, just try it. But J.P. Morgan Chase was fined more than $20 billion last year for major frauds and consumer ripoffs, and his honchos have now deducted that punishment from the corporate tax bill, claiming it as a cost of doing business. Oh, they also get to deduct the many millions of dollars they paid lawyers to defend their blatant wrongdoing. This is Jim Hightower saying, well, sniff the elites, we're merely making rightful use of the deductions allowed by tax laws. But it's their lawyers who wrote those laws to legalize their thievery. And need I mention that they also get a deduction for the mega salaries and expenses of those lawyers? So we pay for their wrongdoings, their fines, and their lawyers.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but know they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Your proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
I gotta tell you, one of the funniest stories I've seen today. Evidently, state officials in Alabama, and you gotta love Alabama, honestly, because when you got a mindset, you stick with it. Evidently, state officials there in Alabama are urging the good citizenry to pray for divine intervention against the EPA's new rules on coal-fired power plants. And the argument is that it's violating God's law. We should be able to burn because God gave it to us. A guy named Chip Beaker said, "Who has the right to take what God's given a state?" I don't know. If you look at it from that angle, and just that view, then nothing can be regulated, nothing can be prohibited. Everything is fair game then. If you look at it, well, God gave it to us. We should be allowed to have whatever it is that's there, right? Wow. I gotta tell you, some of these religious folks, they scare the hell out of me. And when I was a kid, I was always brought up to believe that people who were good church-going people, they were good, decent people, who always had your best interest in mind. And my mother kind of tried to ingrain that thought into me. And I've always kind of believed that people who are churchgoers and claim to be religious, they have a set of they follow the 10 Commandments, maybe, if they can remember them, maybe, which is why they want them posted everywhere. And they're not going to be the ones who are going to steal from you or rob you or cheat you, even though the truth of the matter is every time I've gotten the screw job, it's been by somebody who has said how wonderfully pious they are. Just makes you think. Anyway, if you missed any portion of today's program, the RickSmithShow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast the Rick Smith Show app on your smartphone. Get that, take it wherever you go. So it's always in your pocket. You can listen a couple minutes here and there so you don't miss anything. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, and amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.